The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 301, Harvest Festival, 3 Gifts. It was indeed true. A valley adorned with flowers always evokes a hidden peace within people. A refuge, nestled within the vast valley. A small house, as white as marble, stood amidst it. Opposite it stood 3 10-foot-tall oak trees. Beneath the tree sat a small stool, and upon it sat a young man, leafing through a book. This is outrageous. Ino glanced at the 7 books in his hands and sighed helplessly. The magic beans gifted by the Grimm brothers had sprouted last year, growing overnight into 10-foot-tall oaks, followed by a full year of gestation. Now, the 3 oak trees had also produced gifts. This should have been a joyous occasion, and Ino was indeed delighted that his hard work had borne fruit. But to satisfy his curiosity and to verify his gifts, he took time off to travel to London and buy various editions of the Grimm's fairy tales at Foyle's bookshop. Thanks to Kreber's help, the entire process went smoothly, and no one noticed. The books were purchased, but the outrageous event had finally occurred. From 1812 to 1864, a total of 52 years, the Grimm's fairy tales were reprinted 17 times, 7 of which were complete editions, and the other 10 were simplified versions for children. However, even within these 7 complete editions, the content varied greatly. God knows how many stories are hidden. Ino silently put down the book in his hands and turned his gaze to the 3 oak trees across the street. The first oak tree was ablaze with color. Its leaves had long since vanished, replaced by a variety of gemstones, iridescent moonstones, aquamarine topaz, vibrant pigeon's blood rubies, deep cornflower sapphires, and emerald green garnet tsaphirites. The second oak tree was thriving. Its leaves had not vanished, but had grown even greener in the autumn. Amidst these vibrant foliage hung a delicate, beautiful 5-inch lantern, magically burning with a blue flame. The third tree was relatively ordinary. The oak tree looked much the same as before, the only difference perhaps being the pristine crystal balls suspended among its branches. At first glance, it didn't seem particularly magical, like one of those ordinary 7/6 divination crystal balls sold in Diagon Alley. But this very crystal was the root of Ino's dilemma. The first 2 gifts were easy to guess, the gems needless to say. But the blue hand lamp, after comparing it to the Grimm's fairy tales, was a real surprise. If it were accurate, it was the blue lantern from the fairy tales. A magic lantern that could summon genies might seem a bit puzzling, but after reading the story, Ino had a more intuitive understanding. A more advanced house elf. Perhaps because of fairy tales, the genie in the blue lantern wasn't portrayed as particularly powerful, nor like the genie in Aladdin's lamp, who could grant wishes. However, the genie in the blue lantern could actually perform many trivial tasks, and there was no need to worry about betrayal. To be honest, Ino had long coveted house elves, especially after the valley was filled with herbs. Having an assistant who could effectively care for the herb garden would undoubtedly save a lot of trouble. After all, a troll and a goblin in the valley were fine for manual labor, but they couldn't be relied upon for delicate work. The blue light on the second tree was probably a good guess. But the crystal ball of the third gift was harder to guess, as it lacked any distinctive markings, making it impossible to identify. However, this was only a brief moment of confusion. With only a day or 2 left, even though it looked like the gifts were already hanging on the trees, Ino still wanted to wait until harvest day to collect them. It wasn't the Muggle ritual, but rather that mystery's truly valued ritual. Sometimes waiting a day or 2 wouldn't hurt. The last Sunday in September. Early morning. In the Slytherin dormitory. Ino quietly opened his eyes and sat up in bed, but he didn't immediately draw the curtains. Sitting on the bed, he regained his composure, then vanished from the spot. From the bedroom beneath the castle, it was truly impossible to see the sky outside. But once he reached the sanctuary's valley, Ino could clearly see the sky, a faint bluish-purple hue, and the white light gradually rising in the east. It was a peaceful morning. In the valley, Ino took a deep breath, taking in the fragrance of the flowers and plants, and the lingering sleepiness faded away. Harvest Festival. The harvest has begun. He whispered softly to himself, then walked towards the 3 oak trees not far away. Soon, he arrived at the base of the trees. As he approached, Ino felt sincerely thankful that he had restrained himself for the past 2 days. The gift's appearance remained unchanged, but now the oak trees exuded a strange fragrance. Perhaps it was the scent of ripening grain in the rice fields, a unique blend of nature and harvest. A light, refreshing aroma of rice being under the tree seemed to wash away all worries and noise, bringing a true sense of peace and tranquility. After calming himself slightly, Ino reached out to the second oak tree. Beneath the lush green leaves, a unique blue lantern hung quietly. This lamp, tiny, barely the size of an adult's palm, held an indescribable charm. The body appeared to be crafted from brass, its surface shimmering with a faint, cold metallic sheen. The lampshade, however, wasn't made of traditional glass, but rather a transparent protective film, like a cicada's wing, shimmering ever so slightly as the flickering flame of the wick. But the most striking thing was the blue flame burning within. It lacked the fiery intensity and flamboyance of a typical flame. If it weren't for the occasional flickering flame, it would have resembled something from an oil painting. As if plucking an apple, Ino applied gentle pressure, and the branch connecting the blue lamp to the oak tree quietly severed. The moment he grasped the blue lamp, the flame flickered, and a small figure leaped from the flames. "Master, the blue lamp awaits your command?" the figure inquired, bowing slightly as it landed on the ground. Though abrupt, the sudden change was also understandable. After all, that was how the blue lamp appeared in the story. After the other person appeared, Ino also glanced at the little figure before him. It was about 2 feet tall, with features somewhat resembling a human, but its skin was an unusual shade of blue, and it wore a brass robe. While its appearance might seem strange at first glance, it was actually not ugly. "I want a hearty breakfast," Ino said calmly, looking at the little figure before him. Although it was just a simple breakfast, his purpose was to test Blue Lantern's abilities. He chose breakfast because, in the sanctuary, Phoenix could not freely enter or leave without his permission. Therefore, there were only 2 possibilities for Blue Lantern to obtain food, either converting existing items in the valley, or conjuring them out of thin air, as in fairy tales. The former was normal, the latter would have made Blue Lantern's abilities truly terrifying. Chapter 302 Excellent Servant. In the Sanctuary Valley, Ino gazed with interest at the food before him, a plate of freshly baked flour cakes, freshly toasted bread, crispy cookies, and a glass of honey water with the fragrance of olives. While the food looked exquisite, it also confirmed Blue Lantern's abilities. A little elf who abided by the rules of the magical world. "I'm sorry, Master, there aren't many ingredients to choose from here, so I can only make these." Blue Lantern lowered his head slightly, a little embarrassed. "It's okay, this is enough." Ino shrugged it off. Following the rules was reassuring. If Blue Lantern could truly break the rules of magic, it would actually make him uneasy. "From now on, your task will be to tend to the herbs in the valley. I'll send you a book on how to do this. Now you can go water them." As the voice fell, Ino noticed Blue Lantern bow slightly, his body gradually becoming transparent, and then vanished. At the same time, a faint dark cloud rose in the valley, followed by a continuous drizzle. It's indeed a wizard's ability. Watching the shifting clouds, his suspicions were confirmed. The limit of a Blue Lantern's power is roughly on par with that of a wizard. While it can create food out of thin air, it can create clean water. With over 100 acres of land in the valley, it wouldn't be possible to irrigate them all in a short while. Ino took one last look at the dark clouds drifting overhead, then turned his gaze to the other 2 oak trees. He removed the 7-inch diameter crystal ball. As expected, it was as unremarkable as the oak tree it grew from. It didn't react at all in his hands, like a Muggle ornament. Despite its unremarkable appearance, Ino carefully stored the crystal ball. He remembered a joke he'd once heard about finding glass beads in a chest filled with gold. Those weren't glass beads, but some other kind of gemstone you didn't recognize. The same could be said for this crystal ball. After storing the crystal ball, only the final harvest remained, a dazzling array of gems lining the entire tree. This time, Ino again didn't use magic, but picked each one by hand, like a true farmer. Of course, this wasn't some sentimental sentiment or a strange hobby, but rather a common-sense assumption. After all, harvest festivals generally represent hard work and simplicity. Half an hour later. After much hard work, the harvest was overflowing with gemstones of all colors. At first, he silently recorded the number, but later, he didn't care much. Looking at the gems piled up on the ground like small mounds of earth, He roughly estimated that there were at least 1 or 200. He was sincerely happy about these gems. Unlike gold, gems have a wider range of uses in the magical world, from potions to alchemy. Even some truly rare gems are always priceless. A good harvest is always a joy. After sorting out all the harvest, Ino watered the 3 oak trees, looking forward to the new gifts next year. When he was done, he bent down to pick up the breakfast prepared by Lan, and in a flash, he disappeared into the valley. After all, wasting food is unacceptable, especially for someone who has truly experienced hunger. Slytherin dormitory. Is this a new dish from the Hogwarts kitchens? After Draco got up and washed up, he spotted the food on the dormitory table. The exquisite presentation and the scent of fresh flowers whetted his appetite, and he subconsciously swallowed. It's not made in the kitchen, I bought it outside. But you're welcome. Half leaning on the bed, Ino could easily see Draco's subtle expressions and movements. Then I'll be polite. Hearing the invitation to taste, Draco didn't hesitate and grabbed the flower cake on the table and put it into his mouth. For the next moment, the quiet dormitory was filled with the sound of swallowing food. After eating 2 flower cakes and several cookies in a row, Draco wiped his mouth with a sense of satisfaction. I know. The Durmstrang people might be arriving this afternoon, but before that, I'd like to go to Hogsmeade. Is there anything you need? Hearing Draco's question, Ino suddenly felt dazed. For the past few days, his mind had been preoccupied with the 3 oak trees, and before he knew it, the day of the Goblet of Fire had arrived. I'm asking you, is there anything I can bring you? Seeing no response, Draco asked again. Hogsmeade. Ino instinctively wanted to decline, but then thought of the blue lantern in the valley. Please bring me a book, 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, and if there's time, some butter toffee from Honeydukes. Since the blue lantern was taking care of the herbs, naturally, there would be the picking and storage involved, and a reference book was essential. Leave it to me. I'll be back before noon, Draco assured. As for why he bought duplicate textbooks, he wasn't the least bit curious. 10 minutes later, Draco left the dormitory with a cheerful expression, and so did the entire plate of flower cakes on the table. Looking at the empty plate, Ino hadn't even had time to cast a cleaning spell when she noticed a slight vibration in the bedside drawer. The astronomy tower. Perhaps this was truly the loneliest place in Hogwarts. Aside from the evening astronomy classes, the astronomy tower was even quieter than Snape's potions office on weekdays. The autumn morning sun gently streamed down upon the tranquil astronomy tower. Hermione stood alone at the tower's edge, her plain witch robes silhouetted golden by the rising sun. She wore a pair of cocky women's ankle boots. One foot planted firmly on the ground, the other lightly on tiptoe, the slender toe of her shoe unconsciously kicking against the aged stone wall of the astronomy tower. After standing there for a moment, seemingly feeling a little bored, Hermione turned and walked towards the edge of the astronomy tower. With his hands resting lightly on the cold parapet, he quietly gazed out at the forbidden forest in the distance. But what Hermione didn't notice was that the moment she turned, a flash of orange light flashed across the tranquil astronomy tower. Following this flash of orange light, Ino appeared atop the tower. Thanks to the Phoenix's apparition, everything was silent. Upon reaching the tower, he was greeted by a beautiful scene. Atop the tranquil tower, a tall young woman rested her hands on the edge of the parapet, gazing quietly into the distance. The sunlight bathed her long, slightly curly brown hair, seemingly coated in a golden sheen, each strand gleaming with a soft glow. Although everything before him seemed so beautiful, like a meticulously crafted painting, Ino sensed a tinge of loneliness within it. This feeling reminded him of 3 years ago. On that same sunny morning, he sat by the Thames, enjoying a cheap breakfast while watching the passing boats and people. It was a bustling scene, yet a sense of loneliness etched itself deeply into the bones. A stranger in a strange land, that's what it must be like. Ino didn't know why, but it suddenly struck her that Hermione never quite fit in at Hogwarts. Unlike the original story, where the trio forged a deep friendship during their shared adventures, in this current story, Hermione remained largely alone. Even after 4 years, this proud girl remained outside of Gryffindor. Chapter 303, Wasted Talent. Time flashback to 20 minutes ago. After Draco left, Ino was about to use a cleaning spell on the dishes on the table when the vibration of the bedside drawer caught his attention. He connected the two-way mirror, and thus began his journey to the astronomy tower. Hermione. A soft call shattered the tranquility of the astronomy tower. Hearing the call, Hermione turned in surprise, a smile spreading across her face that she couldn't hide. I know, I'm sorry to disturb your weekend, but I feel like I have something I need to give you that might be helpful. Hermione turned around and walked briskly towards the boy in front of her. Don't worry, I don't usually sleep in on weekends, Ino said with a gentle wave of his hand, then waved his wand at the ground. 2 wicker chairs and a small coffee table quietly appeared in the astronomy tower. Sit down and talk. You look like you haven't had breakfast yet. Ino pulled over a wicker chair and looked at Hermione inquiringly. Yes. But there's no rush. Hermione readily admitted that she was hungry. Book-Splittins and Durmstrang are arriving today. I'm not sure how Headmaster Dumbledore will select the champions for Hogwarts, but I think you'll find these things useful, Hermione said, searching her pockets. Meanwhile, Ino stared in amazement at the small coffee table. It had been empty, but in just a moment or two, it was now filled with a dazzling array of items. Buffy's brain refresher, fireproofing potion, cheerfulness potion, relaxant, remembrance potion, bone spirit, common antidote, shrinking potion, invigorating potion. It was a vast pile. While potions weren't Ino's forte, the sheer volume of potions on the table seemed beyond his comprehension. How could a fourth-year girl have so many? If he hadn't been familiar with the original story, he would have been tempted to wonder about Hermione's background and her connection to the other Granger of the extraordinary potions. But in this fleeting reverie, he noticed the potions on the table had suddenly changed again, with even more bizarre potions appearing. Throat-locking gas, truth serum, living hell potion, confusion potion, despair potion. For a long while, Hermione, like a little hamster, emptied her savings. But just when Ino thought it was over, he noticed the girl across from him making another move. Hermione's slender fingers reached under her collar and pulled out a silver necklace. As the necklace slowly pulled out, a small bottle of shimmering golden potion appeared before Ino's eyes. Felix Felicis. Ino was a little surprised. Unlike the previous potions, some of which were precious, most were also available. But Felix Felicis required connections and channels, even money wouldn't buy it. There were only a handful of potion masters in the magical world who could refine Felix Felicis. Therefore, whenever it came on the market, potion shops were always the first to buy it. This wasn't just a baseless guess. Ino had discussed this with Lucius before. After all, Lucius had once given him a small bottle of Felix Felicis. But after the discussion, the answers were surprisingly unanimous. No one would allow the Felix Felicis to leak out. Looking at the potion on the table and the one in Hermione's hand, Ino was instantly curious about what this girl had experienced. He simply didn't believe she hadn't had some adventure. The Felix Felicis didn't just appear out of nowhere. Hermione, I made it myself. Hermione answered preemptively, as if anticipating the question. She raised her head with a hint of pride, her swan-like neck gleaming like snow in the sunlight. Though her expression hinted at pride, Hermione's face was one of begging for praise. Incredible. Ino's admiration came from the heart. He suddenly realized that Hermione had truly been delayed in the original story. Perhaps Hermione's true strength wasn't rote memorization, let alone her future as Minister of Magic. Her true talent lay in becoming a potions master. After a brief moment of reflection, Ino had already uncovered some details from the original story. A second-year Muggle witch, armed with a banned library book, slipped into the bathroom and quietly brewed the elaborate Polyjuice potion, miraculously succeeding on the first try. Meanwhile, Hermione's brown eyes lit up like stars at the praise, her entire body radiating joy. What about the Felix Felicis? You made that too? Ino exclaimed, then suddenly looked away. Her fair fingers contrasted sharply with a golden potion. However, Hermione's smile froze at the mention of the Felix Felicis. That's not it. Hermione lowered her head a bit, embarrassed, but quickly raised it again. But I can brew the Felix Felicis, seriously. I just don't have enough time. 6 whole months. And I can't take the cauldron home. Listening to Hermione's quiet defense, Ino suddenly felt that the world was truly amazing. Some people spend their entire lives only able to cast a single memory charm, while others, in their 4th year, have already reached the level of a top-tier potions master. Indeed, the concoction of the Felix was a watershed moment, marking the limit of what could be learned from textbooks. Beyond this, one becomes a potions master like Snape. To become a potions master, textbooks are no longer of any help. One must rely on one's own understanding, whether it's refining techniques or developing new potions. Hermione, your talent in potions is truly beyond expectations, Ino praised without hesitation. But in response to this second compliment, Hermione didn't act as smug as she had before. She gently set down the Felix in her hand and pushed the potions on the table. Here, all these are for you. I don't know what you'll need them for, but historically, injuries have always occurred in the Triwizard Tournament. Her words were sincere, her eyes blazing. Honestly, Ino was truly moved at that moment, even though it was all a misunderstanding caused by a lack of information. But no matter the misunderstanding, the underlying feelings remain unchanged. Just like how everyone cares about the glittering glory, few appreciate the heartache behind it. Somehow, Ino suddenly thought of the opening scene, the lonely figure of the girl on the astronomy tower. Perhaps, behind the myriad potions before him, countless hardships were hidden. Thinking of this, he looked up at Hermione again, her brown eyes still full of smiles. There's no time to share the information today. It's already too late for the chapter. Finally. Xiaodi, please vote. Robbery votes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304 Phoenix Crabber's Healing. Atop the astronomy tower, the potions on the Transfiguration coffee table had long since vanished, replaced by freshly baked flour cakes and honey water. In fact, when Hermione brought out the pile of potions, Ino had initially been reluctant to accept them. After all, he had no intention of participating in the Goblet of Fire. But under the girl's expectant gaze, he accepted a few bottles of less popular potions, such as Veritaserum and Bone Age. Although he didn't know where Hermione had gotten the ingredients, he decided to wait until the valley herbs were collected and pack them up for Christmas to give away, since he had nothing to do anyway. Meanwhile, after the potions were put away, the coffee table naturally became empty. Considering Hermione's previous mention of an empty stomach, Ino instinctively called out for the Blue Lantern. To his surprise, the Blue Lantern actually appeared. This little elf born of flame seemed unconstrained by the sanctuary, its 2-foot-long body appearing in the astronomy tower. After a brief moment of contemplation, he had a rough idea of what was going on. The Blue Lantern itself was the magic lamp, which was hung in the valley of the sanctuary. The original body hadn't left. Perhaps this was the fundamental reason Blue Lantern had broken free from its limitations and appeared at Hogwarts. Atop the astronomy tower, Hermione watched the entire process in silence. After Blue Lantern had presented the flour cakes and honey water and completely vanished, she whispered, "What was that just now? I've never seen any reference to it in a book." Hearing the question, Ino briefly organized his words. "You can think of it as a creature I created, a magical spiritual being similar to the Phoenix. Have you read Mr. Scamander's article?" Thinking of the vomiting organization in the original story, he quietly shifted his focus. Actually, seriously speaking, it was just that, a product of its own miracle, a causal relationship that made sense. Newt Scamander? His article was published in Transfiguration today. I didn't expect you to create this besides the Phoenix, but the Phoenix. Hermione took over, continuing her train of thought and discussing some knowledge about the Phoenix. Time had flown by, and by her 4th year, Hermione's voice seemed to have shed its earlier immaturity, now possessing a mature, magnetic quality. The voice was pleasant, but it couldn't withstand the barrage of chatter. Hearing the endless stream of words, Ino felt a little frustrated, but he also knew Hermione's nature. She wasn't a chatterbox, but sometimes, on certain topics, she couldn't stop. "Hermione, have you seen a Phoenix?" With just one sentence, Ino successfully diverted Hermione's attention. Seeing the train stop, he decisively called out to the Phoenix, "Corriber." The orange-red figure streaked across the astronomy tower before landing steadily on Ino's shoulder. "You've given me so many potions, I have a gift for you too." As if sensing her master's thoughts, Corriber turned and picked up a beautiful phoenix feather in her slender beak. "If you're in danger, ignite this feather with magic, and Corriber will come to your aid immediately." With that, Ino pushed the phoenix's tail feather towards Hermione. To his surprise, Hermione didn't look at the feather. Instead, her brown eyes fixed on Corriber, a look of fondness brimming from her brow. Seeing this, Ino smiled silently. He was absolutely confident in his phoenix's beauty. Furthermore, Kreber possessed healing and redemptive qualities, its pure warmth irresistible. Would you like to hold it? After a moment's deliberation, Ino asked invitingly. He had actually seen a hint of loneliness and desolation in Hermione's back. While this might not be a problem for a muggle, it could be a bit of a nuisance for a wizard. A wizard's magic is always connected to emotions, but if they live for too long in an environment where they can't fit in and find a place to anchor, it's likely to cause problems. At the same time, Hermione's eyes flashed with surprise and joy at the invitation. Can I do this? Even though she already loved it, even though her hands were almost on the verge of reaching out, Hermione reservedly confirmed it. Seeing this, Ino said nothing more, but turned to Kreber on his shoulder. A flash of orange light passed, and Hermione felt the warmth of his embrace. Quietly reaching out, her slender, white fingers tentatively touched the phoenix. Seeing no resistance, she gently placed her palm against it, the entire process handled with care. Perhaps this didn't seem like a big deal to Hermione, but for Ino, witnessing the scene, it brought back memories. A somewhat desolate orphanage, children receiving gifts from a respectable gentleman at Christmas, their expressions were the same. Inexpressible joy, expressions of disbelief, ultimately transformed into cautious touch. It was like a chick gazing at the world outside its nest for the first time, all was gentle and timid. Unlike Ino, lost in fleeting memories, Hermione didn't dwell on it. The moment the phoenix appeared, she felt a surge of warmth. When she truly held it in her arms, a sense of happiness washed over her. It seemed as if everything was perfect, countless late-night studies, secret potions brewed alone in abandoned classrooms. The loneliness and hardship, all transformed into a warm memory. Countless past images, at that moment, seemed to be framed in exquisite frames, hanging deep in his mind, gleaming with a unique light. Meanwhile, in just a few minutes, Ino had noticed a change in Hermione. This change wasn't outward, nor was it palpable. It was more like an intangible feeling, something he'd witnessed once before in Pansy, a solidification of magic and a shift in emotional memory. Now, he felt more at ease about Hermione. He'd also discovered the special uses of his phoenix. It seemed to help wizards sort through their emotions and magic, like a muggle therapist. Perhaps this also fits Crib's name, healer and regenerator. Ino's gaze shifted, watching the girl holding the phoenix before him. He somehow thought of Fid. A similarly comical image emerged in his mind. His parents had a second sister, and as the firstborn, he suddenly lost favor. Fid, aggrieved, picked up his packed bag in his beak and flew silently into the distance under the setting sun. The sudden image in his mind almost made him burst out laughing. But after the joke, Ino realized that his two phoenixes seemed quite extraordinary to everyone else. Lucius had once been nearly frightened out of his wits by close contact with Fid, and now, with Hermione holding Kleber, it had produced a similarly magical effect. Miracle, naturally, he thought of this concept. But upon closer inspection, it seemed that this was all due to his own miracle. Fid's original emotions came from the continent of Arad, while Kleber came from Middle-earth. Neither of these places had any connection to the magical world. With this shift in thinking, Ino no longer had any doubts. Besides, no matter how they changed, the two phoenixes' belonging would remain unchanged. He also thought about the future. In the future, perhaps Hogwarts would even have a psychiatric unit, and Kleber might even receive a salary. Chapter 305 Ron's Show-Off. 1994, on the rooftop of the astronomy tower, Ino waited until almost noon before tactfully bidding Hermione his last respects. Despite chatting for hours all morning, he wasn't bored. On the contrary, he felt the time had flown by rather quickly. That same day, at lunchtime, the Great Hall was unusually bustling. With a notice posted, everyone knew that teachers and students from Boxburtons and Durmstrang would be visiting Hogwarts before 6 p.m. that evening. Therefore, even on weekends, no one chose to go to Hogsmeade. At the Gryffindor table, Ron quickly finished his plate, his energy radiating once again. "Harry, have you heard? They've decided on the champion." Ron's voice was quiet, but it seemed to carry far and wide. With him as his centerpiece, the young wizards within a 10-meter radius seemed to slow down their eating pace. As a master of information, Ron easily grasped the surrounding situation, which made him nod with satisfaction. But before Ron could continue, an untimely rebuttal erupted. "You're at it again. "If the professors really choose a champion, I won't be attending the Triwizard Tournament," said Dean Thomas, one of Harry and Ron's roommates. As he finished speaking, Seamus, another roommate sitting next to Dean, whispered, "Just listen to what he has to say. We can't think of any interesting topics anyway." The typical 5-person boys' dorm room perfectly embodied the dynamic of alliances. Dean, always disapproving of Ron, always found fault with him. Seamus, while closer to Dean, also had a connection to Ron, seemingly playing both sides. Meanwhile, Ron ignored Andy's rebuttal. After all, this wasn't a dorm, and he didn't need an audience. Glancing around, noticing the curious glances of the other young wizards, Ron cleared his throat and feigned a glance at Harry. "Harry, I just learned this secret." It said the professors accidentally let it slip. His words were cryptic, yet his voice somehow sounded like a lecture. A small cultural salon had emerged. Besides the discussion led by Ron, there were also numerous other discussions taking place in the Great Hall. From a few people to a dozen or so, everyone was discussing who would become the Hogwarts champion. Of course, the young wizards from each house hoped their own would be elected. However, the most talked about topics in the discussion were Ino and Cedric. Seriously, Cedric had been at the school for 6 years and had amassed considerable prestige, though this prestige was mostly limited to Hogwarts, but that was enough. Amidst a heated discussion, the mood in Slytherin was slightly subdued. After Draco's unintentional comment, they all understood one thing: Ino was most likely not participating in the Triwizard Tournament. Reason told them that Ino's actions were correct. After all, the Order of Merlin's medal was always more valuable than the glory of the Triwizard Tournament. But emotionally, the Slytherins still felt a slight sense of loss. Lunch, amidst the noise and melancholy, quietly ended. Time quickly turned to afternoon. By 4 o'clock, thanks to the concerted efforts of all the prefects, the castle was deserted. The prefects didn't need to remind them, no one wanted to miss such a novelty. On the lawn by Black Lake, Professor McGonagall had already taken her designated spot. As if to honor the formalities of the welcome, she had not only changed into brand new robes but also meticulously donned her pointed wizard's hat. The scene, even from afar, was awe-inspiring. By the lake, an elderly witch led a neatly arranged group of young wizards, all standing in silence. But Alice, beauty is meant to be shattered. With the first whispers from the crowd, things gradually spiraled out of control. The discussion, cautious at first, gradually escalated into unbridled abandon. "Quiet. Line up. Prefects, keep an eye on them." Enchanted by magic, Professor McGonagall's voice reached every young wizard. Apparently, she was in a bad mood, and her tone tinged with emotion. But the effect was remarkable. After her bark, all the young wizards huddled down like a ball of puffy catkins. After everyone had regained their composure, Professor McGonagall turned and gazed into the distance again. She was truly annoyed, and the source of her annoyance was the renowned Order of Merlin. They insist on October. What a rigid, inflexible old-fashioned bunch. Professor McGonagall couldn't help but resent it. The three great European schools of magic had been battling openly and covertly for centuries, each vying for the undisputed supremacy. The very same purpose had been behind the creation of the Triwizard Tournament. The three schools of magic, competing under reasonable rules and established standards, would nominally crown the winner. But news reached her that Ino, her most promising student, might miss the competition due to the Merlin Order Awards ceremony in October. This was quite disturbing. As Professor McGonagall grumbled to herself, the clamor behind her gradually grew louder. "Quiet. Everyone." The young wizards fell silent again amidst the loud shouting. But unlike Professor McGonagall, who cared little for protocol, the other three headmasters, including Dumbledore, remained united in silence. The following moments were quite interesting. Roughly every 15 minutes, Professor McGonagall's scolding echoed from the shores of the Black Lake. One scolding, then 15 minutes of peace. After 6 repetitions, a full hour and a half had passed. It's 5:40. Will they be late? It would be a real bummer if they were late for something like this. Ron pulled out his pocket watch, his face anticipating a show of excitement. Interestingly, despite his idle chatter, he didn't retract his pocket watch, seemingly displaying it intentionally or unintentionally. It was an exquisitely crafted mechanical watch, inlaid with a ruby the size of a fingernail. The dazzling red gem occasionally flashed a streak of light, leaving George and Fred at the back of the crowd speechless. I told him to give him 2 sickles, just to get him over with. You insisted on 2 galleons, Fred said, his head lowered in frustration. How could I have known he would do this? He'll never get a nut from me again. George also turned away. Up ahead, watching Ron's lowbrow display from a distance, they both felt a wave of embarrassment. At that moment, they truly regretted giving Ron pocket money so generously after the World Cup. Coincidentally, as Ron skillfully displayed his watch, Draco, from the Slytherin team, also pulled out his pocket watch. The difference was that Draco simply checked the time and put it back. I know. Do you think they'll be late? Chapter 306. Want to cheat? Everything changes. Things are always in a state of flux. Just as Draco was about to ask about the other 2 schools, a commotion erupted in the crowd. Look at the sky. What's that? Pegasus. What Pegasus? That's Boxburton's rune horse. As if it were a goblin. As the discussion continued, more and more young wizards looked up. In the distant sky, a dark speck approached at an alarming speed. Gradually, everyone could see a massive creature darting through the clouds. The carriage, as large as a house, was adorned with elaborate decorations, and even the doors were inlaid with gems. These gems weren't just random embellishments. Upon closer inspection, the gems formed a clear heraldic pattern, resembling 2 crossed wands. However, no matter how ornate the decorations, the young wizards present had no time to admire them. All eyes were fixed on the behemoth in front of the carriage. It was a gigantic horse with wings on its back. More accurately, it was a giant African elephant that looked like a horse. Nearly 15 feet tall, these horses looked incredibly majestic, their teacup-sized eyes a strange blood red. 12 of these enormous beasts flew closer and closer toward the young wizard at the Black Lake, causing some students in the front rows to retreat in panic, seemingly the only way to avoid being hit. At that moment, Rubeus Hagrid, the Care of Magical Creatures professor, stepped forward, his body a size comparable to the horse's, blocking the young wizard's path. The once mighty figure now brought a sense of peace to many. Hagrid held 2 warning signs, each the size of a dining table, in both hands, waving them as he moved, like a Muggle airport ground attendant. Quickly, under Hagrid's guidance, the horses changed direction. With a sudden thud, the ground shook, and the carriage, as big as a house, came to a steady stop, away from the crowd. As everyone watched, the carriage door was pushed open from the inside. A student in a blue robe leaped from the carriage and, with a simple wave of his wand, a magnificent golden staircase slowly descended. This grand spectacle truly amazed many young wizards. After all, not everyone could afford to inlay carriage doors with gemstones and build staircases out of gold. Throughout Europe, only Boxburtons could afford such extravagance, thanks to their distinguished alumnus, the legendary alchemist Nicholas Flamel. Simultaneously, as the magnificent golden staircase unfolded, a massive foot clad in diamond-studded high heels emerged, followed by a woman who rivaled Hagrid's height. Standing 15 feet tall, approximately 4.5 meters, this woman imbued an imposing presence upon her arrival. Although she was roughly the same height as Hagrid, no one, including Ino, would have mistaken them for one another. The woman before them was simply too elegant, with her refined attire, unwavering smile, and consistent stride. From any angle, there was no fault in her manners. Ino quietly glanced around, taking in the vast contingent of Hogwarts female faculty, the chubby Professor Pomona, the rambunctious Trelawney, the pedantic ancient runes Professor Barbling, the ethereal astronomy Professor Sinistra, and even Madame Hooch. It seemed that Professor McGonagall was the only one who could stand out. As Ino compared the group, Dumbledore approached with a smile. The old headmaster, though a towering figure, now looked incredibly petite next to the woman before him. Despite the height difference, Dumbledore still followed proper etiquette, taking her hand and kissing it. While impeccable in his actions, the visual aspect was still comical, especially since the woman's palm barely covered most of Dumbledore's face. Due to the distance, many people couldn't hear their exchange. Soon, no one paid attention, as after Dumbledore's hand kiss, a brief delay followed. The exquisite, massive carriage was once again pushed open from the inside. This time, it wasn't a massive figure that stepped out, but rather a dozen or so students, all dressed identically and of similar age. Interestingly, among these 10 or so students, the majority were girls. They all looked to be 16 or 17 years old, each with bright white teeth and an elegant demeanor. Perhaps because they were from France, these women, hailing from the land of perfume, always created a whiff of fragrance as they walked. When the French woman met the English gentleman, Ron demonstrated the correct reaction for everyone: a slightly flushed face, a restless hand, and a gaze that seemed to be fixed on the spot, yet shifted involuntarily. Of course, this reaction wasn't unique to Ron. Many of the 14 and 15-year-old boys at Hogwarts shared the same reaction. Time slipped by quietly. As the sky gradually darkened, Hogwarts welcomed its final guests, the Durmstrang from Northern Europe. Unlike the previous Boxbuttons, the Durmstrang's arrival ignited everyone's enthusiasm. It wasn't just the impressive entrance onto the Black Lake. More importantly, Durmstrang's team included the renowned seeker, Viktor Krum. If it weren't for Professor McGonagall's piercing gaze, the scene outside the castle would have been a mini-signing event. After all, wizards truly love Quidditch to the core. Even so, Krum earned Durmstrang considerable prestige. As headmaster, Karkaroff also looked proud, his head tilted slightly upward, his gaze patronizing. "He seems a bit arrogant." Draco curled his lips in disapproval from the Slytherin team. And it wasn't just Draco, many other young wizards shared his displeasure. Unlike the young wizards of other houses, Slytherins valued Quidditch more for the prestige it brought. "Forget it. Or else, do you want him to embarrass himself?" Ino replied casually. While he didn't care about these one-sided gains and losses, Karkaroff's performance had already given him the urge to cheat. Even if Ron chose the champion, they'd still let the other team win the Goblet of Fire. In the Triwizard Tournament, there's nothing more humiliating than missing out on the championship. If there's, it's finishing last. Ino pondered cheating, but didn't notice the change in Draco's expression. Especially after hearing about embarrassing Karkaroff, a hint of mischievous interest shone in his eyes. It seemed like it was really because of the video camera. After spending so much time with George and Fred, Draco's expression now looked like a carbon copy of them. "Please vote. Please vote. Please vote." Zia Odie's sharing today, Abraxan, the Rune Horse. I think I've shared it before, but I can't remember exactly. I'm sharing it again today. Rune Horse. Appearance: Abraxan is a breed of Pegasus. They are large, very strong, have wings, red eyes, and generally lighter fur with a white mane. Habits: Madame Maxime's Rune Horse only drinks single malt whiskey, and only requires a very strong person to care for it. Whether this applies to all Rune Horses remains unconfirmed. Abilities and functions: the Rune Horse can pull a card and fly. Chapter 307, Dispute in the Auditorium. Late September in the Scottish Highlands. Due to its geographical location, the sky was already somewhat dim at 6 in the evening. But no matter how dim, it couldn't dampen the enthusiasm of the young wizards at Hogwarts. Whether intentional or not, Krum was always seated in the front row, just half a body length away from Karkaroff. Amidst the waves of astonished cheers, Igor Karkaroff, the tall, slender, goateed headmaster of Durmstrang, half-closed his eyes and became somewhat arrogant. "Hogwarts. It's really nice here. I really regret not coming sooner," Karkaroff said in a long drawl. "There's still time. Hogwarts welcomes you. Please follow me to the Great Hall. Madame Maxime is waiting for us." Dumbledore continued to smile, ignoring Karkaroff's change of expression, like a phoenix unwilling to look down upon a crop. The conversation between the two headmasters barely reached the young wizard's ears, but Karkaroff's arrogant expression was clearly visible to everyone. Draco watched with a tinge of disgust. After a moment's thought, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a palm-sized frisbee. But before he could move, he found his hand firmly grasped. "You're crazy. Embarrassing him here will only bring shame upon us." Ino felt helpless. After just a few minutes of interaction, he'd learned that while he disliked Karkaroff's arrogance, he still had a basic understanding. Embarrassing Karkaroff here would clearly show that Hogwarts lacked a proper hospitality. Whether or not Karkaroff would be embarrassed was another matter, but Hogwarts would undoubtedly embarrass him throughout Europe. "I'm not crazy. Now it's dark. Before he enters the castle, away from the crowd, no one will suspect we were responsible," Draco said firmly. This was indeed a good opportunity, but Draco overlooked another person, Dumbledore, who was standing alongside Karkaroff. While the purpose of this frisbee was unclear, something with a trace was essentially evidence. Even if Dumbledore didn't care, the presence of a tangible object would still put Hogwarts at the mercy of the situation. With this thought in mind, Ino took the frisbee from Draco's hand and put it in his pocket. He then glanced around, or rather, at the Gryffindor team. After a moment's delay, He finally confirmed that Draco was the only one present who was so audacious. This was understandable. After Marcus's graduation, there were still many young wizards from the sacred 28 houses in Slytherin, but they were either collateral branches or their families had declined. The only one truly emboldened enough to cause trouble, if one looked throughout the castle, was probably Draco Malfoy. Of course, Harry Potter also had the credentials, but Harry's eyes kept glancing towards Ravenclaw, and no one could tell what he was looking at. In the darkness, Draco, realizing his frisbee had been confiscated, didn't seem to mind. It was all just a spur-of-the-moment decision. Just as he was feeling bored, a familiar voice rang out, "Draco, have you ever thought about becoming a champion? Winning the Goblet of Fire?" For a moment, Ino considered going himself, but the thought of the year-long competition, coupled with all the complicated details, dispelled the idea. Not everything needed to be in the spotlight, and the Triwizard Tournament wasn't a big deal. Becoming a champion. Draco had grasped the core idea. If it had been someone else, he would have refused outright, for no other reason than the danger. But Ino's question plunged Draco into thought. "Don't rush to answer. We can discuss this in the dorms tonight." Ino patted Draco's shoulder. This whole thing had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. Perhaps being fourth was even more humiliating than coming in third. In the original story, Barty could tamper with a Goblet of Fire with a confusion charm, so he could just copy it and get Draco in, satisfying the Slytherin's sense of glory. As he spoke, Ino slowly entered the castle. But it was clear that the dinner wasn't today. Because no one had received any notice from the professors or prefects, and without any notice, it was free time. Outside the hall, Ino glanced at the scene inside, frowned slightly, and subconsciously looked towards the corridor leading to the basement. "Do you want to go back to the dormitory? I'll bring you some food for the party." Draco noticed this subtle change. "No need to bring food. I have flour cakes." Ino rejected his roommate's kindness, and turned to walk to the other side. After Ino left, Draco also tidied his clothes a little, and walked into the hall with a master step, a little ostentatious. However, as soon as he entered the hall, Draco saw that there was someone more ostentatious than him. It was obviously the long table belonging to Slytherin, but Ron looked as confident as if he had returned to the burrow. "Only 10 points. Ron emphasized again in the crowd. "Besides, this isn't Chrome's fault, he's done a great job. There's a saying, it's not the game's fault, it's not the player's fault. It's definitely the coach's." As Ron spoke, he glanced at Chrome from time to time, and when he saw him smile in return, his speech became even more passionate. "Never mind the coach or the players. You're the one at fault right now." Draco pushed through the crowd and sauntered over to Ron. "If I remember correctly, this is Slytherin territory. As for you, a poor, well, Scarhead's poor lackey." Midway through his sentence, Draco seemed to have a sudden thought and abruptly changed the subject, abruptly changing the words that followed. It seemed as if Draco had some hidden talent. In the past, whenever he opened his mouth, he would always provoke a group of wheelies. Although that had changed, he still provoked a multitude of wheelies. That single sentence had Harry irritated. It wasn't the Scarhead nickname that bothered him, it was the lonely lackey he cared about. As Harry grew older, he understood more. The term lazy wasn't just a mockery of Ron, it was also damaging their friendship, especially in today's situation. So, before Ron could react, Harry spoke up. "Poor bastard? Ron's wealth is beyond your imagination. Wisdom, talent, bravery, loyalty, and his family." Harry's sudden outburst not only stunned Draco, but even Ron, who hadn't expected such excellence, felt a moment of flattery. What the other boys didn't notice was that Ginny's eyes lit up with sparkles as Harry exploded. "Excellent? Beyond imagination." After a brief pause, Draco quickly regained his composure and spoke slowly. "In that case, this outstanding red-haired squire, and of course Mr. Scarhead, dare you to make a bet with me." Draco's reaction gave Harry a whiff of conspiracy, and before he could think it through, Ron's voice rang out, "What's your bet?" "I'll take you to the end." Chapter 308, Wandless and Silent Casting. "What's your bet?" "I'll take you to the end." Looking around, Ron, realizing he had practically become the center of attention in the Great Hall, became more confident than ever. "Excellent. Excellent. This is what Scarhead meant by excellence." Draco discreetly lifted Ron up again, pausing briefly before continuing, "Since you're so outstanding, Becoming a Hogwarts champion is a piece of cake. With a single lift and a single push, in the blink of an eye, Draco had Ron lifted into the air. The onlookers were watching with anticipation, especially since this was the Slytherin table. The snakes remained silent because they were waiting for Ron's response. If Ron dared to admit it, they would undoubtedly exaggerate the story. If he didn't, they would immediately teach this Gryffindor the lesson of gossip. As the castle's messenger, Ron understood this simple truth. But he knew he had fallen into a rhetoric trap. Any response would be a mistake. Harry was equally distressed. He felt he'd let Ron down, otherwise, with Ron's cautious nature, he wouldn't be so complacent today. Just as Harry was at a loss for words, a clear voice echoed from the crowd, "Ron's a Gryffindor, so you're all out? Are you all here hoping for a Gryffindor to become a champion? If that's the case, I have nothing to say." At this crucial moment, Ginny stepped forward without hesitation, her thinking equally clear and irrefutable. In truth, she hadn't wanted to get involved, since Malfoy hadn't mentioned the Wheel Eyes this time. But somehow, seeing Harry's frown, she felt compelled to step forward. The turmoil in the Great Hall hadn't affected the castle's basement in the slightest. In the Slytherin dormitory, a few simple dishes lay on the round beach table, a plate of flour cakes, butter toffee wrapped in brown paper, and a few cookies. These were Blue Lantern's meals. Normally, at Hogwarts, there was no shortage of ingredients, but Ino didn't want to use them quietly. Taking without permission is considered stealing. Even if the Hogwarts kitchens weren't lacking these essentials, some things often only matter for substance, not size. Maybe we could set aside a vegetable garden. Looking at the flour cakes before him, Ino suddenly felt that 100 acres of land, planted solely with herbs, was a bit of a waste. 100 acres might not seem like much, but converted to a common unit of measure, it became quite impressive. 1 acre is 4,000 square meters. 100 acres of valley, a full 400,000 square meters, the area of a medieval city. Simply farming seemed insufficient, but the shelter couldn't bring in foreign life. Gradually, Ino began to think of fairy tales, tables that could open, tablecloths that could conjure delicious food at any time, and even more magical items related to food. Thoughts, sometimes, are like dandelions drifting in the wind. No one knows where they come from, and no one knows where they're going. But one thing is certain, the dandelions dancing in the air can sometimes be truly captivating. Just like endless thoughts. In the dormitory, with food as the anchor, Ino's thoughts ran wild. 4 years had passed since entering Hogwarts, and it seemed not only the story had changed, but he himself had, too. He used to worry only about daily matters. Then, after receiving the owl letter, he fretted about the plot of the future story. And so now, perhaps, there was nothing left to worry about. But many things are relative, and so were worries. When there were no worries, there seemed to be no corresponding motivation. Ino sat in his chair, gradually falling into a quiet meditation. Time, like a second, slipped away in his contemplation. Until a buzzing sound in the dormitory broke the silence. The sound still came from the cabinet next to the bed. As the sound rang out, it seemed as if invisible hands were slowly opening it, and a 3-inch round mirror suddenly flew up out of thin air. Ino was stunned by the two-way mirror floating before him. The mirror flew towards him. While this wasn't something to be surprised about, what surprised him was that the mirror had flown by itself. A wandless, silent spell. The thought suddenly occurred to Ino. It was truly remarkable. Although he could now cast spells wandlessly, that was limited to the ice magic woven into his bloodline. For other traditional magic, he still often relied on a wand. Yet, just now, with a mere thought, the cabinet opened, and the two-way mirror naturally floated over. As if struck by a thought, Ino briefly recalled his previous state, his gaze fixed on the butter toffee on the table. In an instant, the brown paper peeled open, and the candy flew over on its own. The first thought. I should have thought of it sooner. Ino smiled, picking up the floating candy and connecting it to the two-way mirror. At that moment, he finally understood the secret of wandless and silent spellcasting. It wasn't some profound theory. It simply involved not thinking, not about the wand, not about the spell, not about the hand gestures. Simply maintain a single, basic thought, even forgetting the magic, allowing it to become a natural reflex. Just like his initial experience with ice magic, it was simply a matter of pure faith, knowing that his own ice and snow were unique to the magical world. It was an instinctive trust, easier said than done. Horizontal ellipsis. In that moment, Ino thought of a past world. In that distant world, magic existed only in books and movies, a mere bedtime story for children. But then again, if magic truly existed in that past world, and a wizard gifted with a real wand was given one, it would likely be useless. The reason was simple, a problem of perception. They always believed magic was just a story from books and movies. Even if they happened to witness it, they would only find all sorts of acceptable and self-sufficient reasons to explain it away, making up their own excuses. For example, they might think it was magical conjuring, or some invisible technological aid. Once seeds of doubt are planted, they naturally won't bear the fruit of magic. Similarly, the young wizards at Hogwarts were convinced that magic could only be unleashed by waving a wand and chanting a spell. After understanding the reason, Ino felt a sense of relief, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "You seem happy." Hermione's voice echoed through the two-way mirror. In fact, after the two-way mirror was connected, Hermione saw a dazed figure through the mirror. In the mirror, Ino sat motionless in a chair, seemingly lost in thought. Seeing this, Hermione initially didn't want to disturb him, but she noticed that Ino had been sitting there for a while and then started laughing to himself again. This made her change her original plan of waiting quietly. Chapter 309 promised me, don't go to Harry. In the Slytherin dormitories, Ino leaned back in a chair, munching on candy while casually chatting with Hermione. Nothing much mattered, but the atmosphere was harmonious. As for the cause, according to Hermione, it was the dispute between Ron and Draco in the Great Hall. However, Ino understood that even without the Great Hall argument, there would be other reasons for the conversation. He didn't mind it, after all, since he couldn't be a true spectator, he might as well just let it flow and integrate into life. At the same time, in the castle's underground corridors, Draco silently blamed himself. He'd set a trap for Weasley, but in the end, Weasley fell into it, dragging him in along with him. "I should have been more reasonable," Draco sighed, looking at the torches on the corridor wall. 10 minutes earlier, during the argument in the Great Hall, perhaps because of the presence of foreign guests, everyone had restrained their verbal exchanges. Similarly, the topic initially focused solely on Weasley, but this verbal exchange ultimately devolved into a battle of champions between students. Thinking of this, Draco felt a pang of regret. He had been the one who had provoked the situation. If a Slytherin champion had truly emerged, it would have been fine. But what if this champion, representing Hogwarts, came from Gryffindor? It went without saying that he would become the target of public criticism. While he wouldn't be universally criticized, there would still be criticism and gossip. While Draco pondered a solution, he also headed towards the common room. Knock. Bang. 2 knocks followed, and then the dormitory door was opened from the outside. Ino paid no attention to the door being opened. As previously mentioned, there were only 3 people in the entire Hogwarts who could open this door, the dormitory students and the Slytherin headmaster. Not even the headmaster had the authority. "Let's talk again sometime." Hearing the door open, Ino hung up the two-way mirror and turned to look at the door. With his platinum blonde, slightly messy short hair, his head lowered, his face scowling, he looked like a golden retriever, lost in an argument and heading home dejected. "What's going on? Someone's bullying the Malfoy young master?" Ino asked teasingly. Although his conversation with Hermione had begun with Draco and Ron's argument, that was only the beginning of the conversation. The conversation didn't continue. Meanwhile, upon hearing the question, Draco looked up with a look of anticipation. "Ino, can you change the time?" But mid-sentence, his voice faded. Draco's expression, like an actor in a play, faded, replaced by a troubled expression. "Do you have a way to make me a safe warrior?" "Yes, a safe warrior." He repeated the word safe twice, emphasizing it. "Tell me, what happened?" Ino sat up straight. "It's nothing serious, I just made a bet with Scarhead's henchman." In less than half a quarter of an hour, Draco hesitantly recounted the entire story. "You really are." Ino shook his head speechlessly, as if Draco's intelligence would noticeably decline whenever he met Harry and Ron. "I have a way to make you a warrior. I'll even guarantee your safety, but you have to promise me that you'll stay away from Harry from now on." He was no plant, and after 4 years of roommates, he genuinely considered Draco a friend. Therefore, he made one final request: stay away from Harry. Of Voldemort's 7 Horcruxes, he had destroyed 3 and confiscated 2. Although Harry had learned Occlumency from Snape, It wasn't a universal magic. Besides, it was impossible for Harry to master more advanced techniques in such a short time. It seemed that Harry's future might truly be a ticking time bomb. Trelawney hadn't forgotten her prophecy. "Okay. I promise." After a brief moment of thought, Draco agreed without hesitation, even adding, "I promise, I'll avoid Scarhead and his henchmen from now on." Time, like the leaves of the whomping willow in autumn, often slips away without notice. The following evening, the long-prepared welcome banquet at Hogwarts began. In the Great Hall, the ribbons representing the 4 houses disappeared, replaced by the emblems of the Triwizard Tournament and the 3 schools of magic, the Shield of Hogwarts, the crossed ones of Bo-Splittons, and the double-headed eagle and stag's head of Durmester. At the Slytherin table, Draco confidently ate his plate of food, occasionally elegantly taking a sip of the pumpkin juice on the table. Compared to Draco, Ron seemed a bit uneasy. He wasn't sure how the champion would be chosen, nor was he sure if Gryffindor would have a champion. After a day of inquiring, he wasn't entirely confident anymore, as there were only 2 top contenders, Ino from Slytherin and Cedric from Hufflepuff. Why didn't Percy repeat a grade? Ron scratched his head in annoyance. Although he hated to admit it, Percy's excellence was obvious to all. The 12 certificates from the final exam spoke volumes. The banquet lasted about an hour. As the food on the table vanished, Dumbledore slowly rose. Simultaneously, all the young wizards present turned their heads, their gazes fixed on the guest of honor table. The guest of honor table was a bit crowded today, with not only the headmasters of 2 other schools but also 2 high-ranking officials from the Ministry of Magic, Ludo Bagman, Director of the Department of Magical Sports and Physical Education, and Bartemius Crouch, Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. "It seems the time has come," Dumbledore said slowly. "First, please allow me to introduce all the guests." Polite applause echoed through the hall as Dumbledore introduced them. "Next, I'll tell you about the arrangements for the Triwizard Tournament." Dumbledore's voice made everyone sit up straight, a mixture of excitement and nervousness spreading through the Great Hall. Thankfully, the old headmaster wasn't one to keep things secret. He glanced around and clapped his hands softly. Near the Great Hall, Filch, who had been waiting for a long time, slowly approached, carrying a box with difficulty. Perhaps because of the importance of the occasion, Filch, usually unkempt, had dressed up for the first time, meticulously combing his messy hair and even donning new robes. But his appearance was undoubtedly in vain, as everyone's attention was focused on the ornate, jewel-encrusted box. Ino was also curious, as the Goblet of Fire, according to the original story, was undoubtedly a powerful magical item. This speculation stemmed from Dumbledore's casual remark, "The goblet's decision could not be reversed. The chosen champion must participate or face the penalty of the oath." Therefore, it was this penalty that truly intrigued him. Being taken seriously by the old headmaster, he probably didn't need a slap on the palm as punishment. If he hadn't been so cautious, he would have even considered using the confounding charm to add another school and throw Voldemort's name in there. But some things are just thoughts. However, regarding the Goblet of Fire, Ino has his own thoughts. Tonight, under the cover of darkness, he can check it out with a lantern and sign up for Draco. It's the beginning of the month, and Zyodi is begging for votes, begging for votes, begging for votes. Big guys, please vote. Zyodi's sharing today. Ever bashing boomerang. Sorry, I can't find the spiked frisbee. It's the one in Draco's hand today. Ever bashing boomerang. Ever bashing boomerang. The ever bashing boomerang is a joke product, derived from the ordinary boomerang used by Muggles. This is also recorded in the original book. Chapter 310, Removal of Restrictions, Confirmed Speculation. At Hogwarts, in the Great Hall for the banquet, Filch also had his moment of glory. Under the gaze of everyone, the castle warden carefully placed the chest he held on the table at the head table. Then, with a slight bow, he quietly departed. I know many are curious about how the 3 champions will be chosen, but I want to say that the entire selection process will be conducted by the most impartial judges. Dumbledore paused briefly, then took out his wand and gently tapped the ornate chest 3 times. Like a wax figure under high heat, the chest melted and dissipated. A simple, unassuming goblet appeared before everyone. A fair selection. The champions of the 3 schools will be chosen impartially by the Goblet of Fire. The Goblet of Fire is now alight. The Triwizard Tournament is irreversible. Boom. As Dumbledore finished his words, the Goblet of Fire suddenly erupted into bright, Dazzling blue-white flame. Those who wish to participate, or are interested in participating, please write your name and school on parchment after the banquet and drop it into the goblet of fire. To this end, I will give you 24 hours to consider. The goblet of fire will be placed in the entrance hall tonight. At this point, Dumbledore looked around at all the young wizards in the Great Hall, his azure eyes filled with seriousness and caution. Finally, I must remind everyone that once your name is chosen by the goblet of fire, there will be no turning back, and no regrets. No one dared to ignore the serious words of the greatest white wizard of the 20th century. Even the most boisterous students, including George and Fred, behaved very well. Dumbledore seemed to be aiming for this exact effect. His gaze swept over everyone again, and he spoke slowly. If you are fortunate enough to become a champion, you will form an unbreakable pact with a goblet of fire. All champions must persevere to the end, unless you perish along the way. The word death made everyone in the Great Hall sit up straight. At that moment, not only the young wizards at Hogwarts, but also students from all three schools, including Boxburtons and Durmstrang, all showed a thoughtful expression. Ino's eyes also flickered with thought, but he was pondering the fact that, unlike the original story, the 17-year-old age limit had been lifted. This was normal. As a high-level alchemical artifact, the Goblet of Fire couldn't possibly select a representative who wasn't worthy of the title. If that were the case, the centuries-old Triwizard Tournament would be a joke. In the original story, all the age and responsibility involved were likely just excuses. If a first-year wizard were truly chosen, it would simply mean that their overall abilities surpassed everyone at Hogwarts. To have sent this young wizard away and replaced him with someone else would have been truly irresponsible and disregarding human life. After all, the Goblet of Fire selection was fair. The age limit had been removed, a minor change to the story. However, this change rekindled Ino's previous speculations. Unraveling the story, it seemed as if everything in the original story had truly taken place under the old headmaster's watch. Using age limits to fish, using the castle portraits for surveillance, and then watching Bard Ejr tamper with a Goblet of Fire, all in an effort to save Harry, or perhaps to allow Voldemort to personally slay his own soul. However, a Black Swan event ultimately occurred, a miscalculation by the wisest of men, caught by Dumbledore. Cedric, unexpectedly, died. Indeed, no matter how well planned a plan is, it will always have flaws. Just like the Time Turner and the Philosopher's Stone, human intervention always imperfect. But as headmaster, Dumbledore's love for the castle and its students perhaps surpassed many people's imagination. Perhaps, for Dumbledore, this incident was the straw that broke the camel's back, because he could have prevented it all, if only from the beginning. Perhaps it was this incident that triggered the old headmaster's mental defenses, causing the once suppressed guilt and grief to surge forth, causing him to touch the resurrection stone without a care. Meanwhile, while Ino was lost in thought, Dumbledore had already begun discussing the relevant matters. 3 levels, 5 judges with fair scoring, and a discussion of glory and prize money. Glory, prize money. As Dumbledore finished his words, the entire Great Hall erupted in excitement, especially the slightly subdued atmosphere that had previously vanished. At the Gryffindor table. Harry. 1,000 galleons. That's a whole 1,000 galleons. Merlin's socks, how heavy would they all be? Ron was so excited that he couldn't breathe. He longed for his own vault. Bill and Charlie had jobs, and Percy, though still an intern, was visibly improving. George and Fred were incredibly wealthy. Ron knew them all too well. Since he could afford 2 galleons in pocket money, he conservatively estimated that George and Fred had at least 2,000 galleons in savings. He was the poorest of the Weasleys, even Ginny was richer. It hadn't mattered if the whole family was poor before, but now that he was the only one, the contrast was piercing. And it wasn't just Ron, all the young wizards present, with the exception of a few who remained calm, were thrilled. 1,000 galleons was a huge sum for many people, even families. At the guest of honor table, Dumbledore let the students play for a few minutes before reaching out and pressing down on the air with his hands. After the hall gradually quieted, he slowly spoke. "All right. I've said all I need to say. The rest of the time is yours. Before I leave, I have one final word. The Goblet of Fire's decision is irreversible." As Dumbledore finished his words, the professors and foreign guests left the hall one after another. The 2 powerful directors of the Ministry of Magic, in particular, left the hall decisively. Interestingly, Old Barty Crouch looked as pale as if he had lost too much blood, and he almost stumbled and fell as he left. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to the guest of honor seats. Everyone's attention was focused on the goblet of fire. As the adults left, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became lively. The chatter was so intense that if the ceiling hadn't been enchanted, it would have nearly blown over. Ino smiled at the scene before him. This was the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry he imagined, a castle filled with laughter. With a light tap of his finger on the table, a glass of freshly squeezed herbal juice appeared before him, the power bestowed by the castle on display in this moment. Just as he picked up the cup, Ino heard a clumsy greeting in his ear. "Hello. That day, your performance was great." Krum had a faint smile on his face. He had recognized the person in front of him a long time ago. He still remembered the song with a distinct rhythm in the World Cup. "Thank you. You are also very good at Quidditch." Faced with a friendly exchange, Ino also responded in a friendly manner. After a brief conversation, Krum sat down. In fact, he wanted to say hello yesterday, but he didn't have the opportunity and didn't meet anyone during the day. "Are you going to participate in the Triwizard Tournament? I think it will be easy for you to become a champion of Hogwarts." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311 Krum's Wisdom, Overestimating Humanity. Someone once said that everything in the world is relative. Black and white, good and evil, even noise and tranquility, they are always in opposition, yet they also exist in a state of unity and harmony. This is indeed the case. Amidst the bustling great hall, there are always pockets of quiet. At the Slytherin table, after Krum sat down next to Ino, he was surprised to find that none of the people who had previously sought autographs were there. Of course, he knew it wasn't his fame waning, but rather that many people were unwilling to approach him at this time. This situation had also occurred at Durmstrang, especially after the Quidditch World Cup and the reopening of school, when his alma mater experienced a similar surge of interest. This enthusiasm was also rational. As long as the professor was around, everyone tacitly agreed not to interrupt. Thinking of this, Krum calmly examined the young man beside him. Although he wore an ordinary, plain-colored formal robe, it looked like a tailor-made evening gown on him. With short black hair and a dark green collar, he exuded a calm and mysterious air. Ino, noticing Krum's gaze, turned slightly. "If it's just a chat, I think it's about time. After all, I have classes tomorrow." After the previous exchange, he knew clearly that Krum had some ulterior motive, but since he remained silent, he didn't want to waste any more time. Meanwhile, seeing Ino about to leave, Krum stopped rambling and got straight to the point. "It's about the Visioniscope. I want to bring them to Durmstrang." As a professional Quidditch seeker, Krum was well aware of the dangers of the profession and its short lifespan. Therefore, before graduation approached, he had to take advantage of his fame to plan for his future 10 years from now. "You should talk to the person in charge about this, not me." Hearing it was about the Visioniscope, Ino waved his hand, decisively refusing. While the items were his and he was the majority shareholder, with the establishment of a board of directors, some things couldn't be done arbitrarily. Rules were rules. I know that. I've written many letters, but received no response. I don't expect any special privileges, but I just lack the opportunity to meet Mr. Flint. Seeing he was being misunderstood, Krum ignored the language barrier and quickly expressed his thoughts and the general outline of what had happened. No response. Ino frowned slightly. Amidst a long, broken English, he accurately grasped the key points. Logically, with Krum's fame, especially after his Quidditch success, his letters wouldn't have fallen on deaf ears. It was like a top Muggle football star approaching a luxury goods company about an endorsement offer. Even if the company had no intention of hiring a spokesperson, they would politely decline. In a few seconds, Ino considered many possibilities, but with no basis for his arguments, he couldn't say much. "Thank you. I understand. I'll give you a positive response before Halloween." Without further delay, after Krum said goodbye, Ino stood up and headed out of the Great Hall. He paused only briefly as he passed Draco, who then chose to leave with him. Honestly, in such a vast hall, one more or two less people is perfectly normal. Of course, That assumes the departing individuals are insignificant, or rather, unremarkable. Ino and Crum sitting together wasn't just 1+1. Seriously, aside from the Irish team's collective glory, the 422nd Quidditch World Cup was solely about the two of them. Therefore, while no one interrupted their conversation, the focus remained. Ino's departure was noticed by many, the Gryffindor table, the Ravenclaw table, even Books Buttons. Of course, the Badgers continued to eat, drink, and be merry. Under the castle. Perhaps because everyone was gathered in the hall, the silent corridor seemed a bit chilly, but it was the only access to the Slytherin common room. Draco followed Ino silently. Although he had no idea what was happening, he knew it wasn't a pleasant situation, and keeping silent was the only prudent option at the moment. In this quiet atmosphere, they soon reached the common room entrance. After the password was verified, a passage opened from the center of the wall. They returned to their dormitories. Draco, have you paid any attention to the videoscope thing? Ino asked bluntly after sitting down. He'd actually considered it on the way there. He concluded it most likely had nothing to do with the Malfoys. Even if Draco did something foolish, Lucius would have intervened immediately. Videoscope. Draco was stunned for a moment. But he quickly realized something was amiss. This was no small matter, and without hesitation, he spoke immediately. I didn't manage their operations. I simply injected 10,000 galleons and provided a 900 square foot shop in Diagon Alley. Beyond that, I haven't paid much attention to anything else. And Draco spilled all the information, even including dividends and gossip. Ino sat calmly in his chair, relieved that Draco didn't seem to be lying. Please write a letter to Marcus, calling everyone involved in the operation. We need a meeting next weekend. Of course, those who only receive a share of the profits are welcome to attend as well. I'll write it right away. Draco nodded calmly. After a moment, he asked, where? The Diagon Alley shop or Malfoy Manor? Let's hold it in the Diagon Alley shop. This isn't a party, so we don't need a big place. After a moment's thought, Ino chose Diagon Alley. Some things can't always be left at someone else's place. This incident also reminded him that it might be time to buy a manor. While it might cost a lot, the last thing he needed right now was money. He had taken a trip to Gringotts to facilitate the distribution of profits, but after opening his own vault, he hadn't looked into it since. He wasn't sure how much money he had now, but he figured it was plenty. After their business conversation, the dormitory fell silent. Draco bent over his desk, writing a letter while thinking about the conversation he had with his father before school started. Galen does have magical powers, but as the heir of the Malfoy family, the first thing you must learn is to reject greed. His father's advice was still ringing in his ears. He didn't think anything of it at the time, but now it seems that Garland really does have magical powers. Chapter 312 Midnight Encounter, The Secret of the Goblet of Fire. As night fell, the bright moonlight, like a soft, mysterious layer of silver sand, gently enveloped the earth. Hogwarts Castle, Buxbaden's carriages, and Durmstrang's ships were all shrouded in silence. Only the occasional cry of an owl and the whisper of the wind among the nearby leaves could be heard. No other sound. The night remained deep. Inside Hogwarts Castle, in the Great Hall's side hall, beneath the vast ceiling, no one was present. Only the ancient goblet of fire stood in its center, its blue-white flame quietly burning. The flame seemed neither blazing nor cold, but rather imbued with an indescribable mystery. The tranquil castle and the ancient goblet of fire met at that moment, as if, in the stillness of the night, they shared secrets of the past and the future. But soon, this atmosphere was broken. With a flash of red light, a figure holding an oil lamp appeared in the room. With Crib's help, Ino arrived at the Great Hall alone. The quiet hall, the goblet of fire burning, the somewhat beautiful scene before him, made him want to take a photo. He did just that, disappearing again, but this time without the aid of the Phoenix's power. He returned to Sanctuary Valley alone. When he reappeared, he held a sleek Polaroid camera in his hand. It had been a gift from Newt back in America, but he'd rarely used it since then, and now it was perfectly put to good use. Click. With a soft click, Ino held a photo of the goblet of fire burning in his hand. He hung the camera around his neck and walked forward, lantern in hand. Facing the mysterious bluish-white flames, the inch-long flame of the bronze oil lamp was unobstructed by them, its orange flames casting a warm glow. In the light, Ino could clearly see the intricate alchemical formulas engraved on the goblet of fire. Though seemingly complex, they were roughly divided into two parts, forming a double spiral shape that extended from the bottom of the cup upwards. Things were different now. Ino had long since amassed a considerable knowledge of both alchemy and ancient runes. Now, upon closer inspection, he could discern some of the key points. The two sets of inscriptions on the Goblet of Fire represented two distinct functions. One seemed to encompass the power of discrimination and selection, while the other clearly carried a hint of dark magic, as if connected to a curse. Seeing the curse, he hesitated a moment longer than he had previously decided. Was Draco up to the responsibility? The difference between the protagonist and the supporting characters in a story is often more than a fraction. Harry's safety didn't guarantee the safety of others. Furthermore, considering the goblet's centuries of history and the complex alchemical formulas inscribed on it, after much hesitation, he finally decided to abandon his previous plan. He would neither manipulate fate nor be manipulated by it. With his mind made up, Ino once again picked up the camera hanging from his neck and began photographing the Goblet of Fire from close range. Suddenly, a series of snapping sounds echoed in the quiet side hall. After taking a dozen shots from various angles, ensuring he hadn't missed anything, Ino finally put down his camera. Just as he was about to leave, another figure appeared in the side hall. I thought you'd include a name, even confound the Goblet of Fire with a confusion charm, but you're just taking pictures. That's unexpected. Dumbledore, dressed in a blue robe and a rather cute moon-shaped nightcap, quietly appeared in the side hall. Ino wasn't surprised to see the old headmaster. While it had been a mere speculation before, now that he had acquired some of the headmaster's power, he had a clearer understanding of Dumbledore's control over the castle. But now, hearing Dumbledore's sigh, Ino didn't hide his thoughts. I thought so too at first. I even had a name ready. As he spoke, Ino pulled out a parchment with the name Draco Malfoy written on it from his pocket. With a snap of his fingers, the parchment flew silently towards Dumbledore. But after seeing the Goblet of Fire, I changed my mind. I don't want to be the one pushing fate, nor do I want to be pushed by it. So I'll just take a few quick photos as a souvenir. Ino had another hidden thought in his mind, the same reason he initially didn't want to participate in the Goblet of Fire. Because he didn't want to be pushed by fate either. At the same time, Dumbledore looked at the flying parchment and suddenly sighed. This single, wandless, silent levitation spell alone surpassed the abilities of more than 99% of wizards. Gently taking the parchment and glancing at the name on it, Dumbledore slowly spoke. For those who are willing, fate leads them forward. For those who resist, fate pushes them forward. But he overlooked the third option and walked with fate. It was a wise saying. Ino also savored it carefully. For a long time. It's hard to believe that you can so skillfully use fate to explain a problem. It should be the exclusive domain of us fortune tellers, Ino said with a smile. He understood Dumbledore's intentions and his underlying strategy. It seemed as if any Hogwarts headmaster must possess a corresponding level of prestige and honor. While this might seem utilitarian, it was the reality. Living in the secular world, no one was immune to this influence. Even the reclusive Nicholas Flamel had to consider spokespersons when handling his estate. It was like a Google gear, no matter how difficult it might be to turn, the very first turn of the gear would already influence the final outcome. As Ino pondered fame and fortune, Dumbledore, too, took a nostalgic look. After a moment, Dumbledore took over the conversation. Exclusively for fortune tellers? Unfortunately, I once had a fortune teller friend. Hearing this, Ino suddenly regretted his earlier joke. He had truly forgotten about the one from Nurmengard. Truthfully, using someone's tragic past as fodder for ridicule was profoundly rude. Especially when the target of the ridicule was a man over 100 years old. With this thought, Ino changed the subject. Professor. If possible, I'd like to wait a little longer. Professor McGonagall is a great choice. Hearing this, Dumbledore nodded gently in agreement. I don't deny Minerva's dedication, and I acknowledge her excellence. But you should know what she cares about. Well, perhaps you're right. Ino smiled, thinking that walking with fate was a good choice. Thinking of this, he pulled his notebook from his pocket, tore off a piece of paper, wrote his name on it, and threw it into the Goblet of Fire. In an instant, the blue-white flame surged, and as the Goblet of Fire consumed the paper, a flash of orange flame flickered. Well, it's time for me to go to bed. But before I go, I sincerely advise that the elderly try not to stay up late. As he finished speaking, Crib appeared at Ino's shoulder, a red halo flashing. and then her figure disappeared. In the quiet side hall, Dumbledore stood alone, silent. Looking at the burning blue flame, he seemed to be lost in some kind of contemplation, his eyes becoming blurred and distant. Zyodi is begging for votes, begging for votes, begging for votes. Big guys, please vote. Zyodi's sharing today. The Billowig Propeller. The Billowig Propeller is an invention of Xenophilius Larvigid. It looks like small glittering blue wings and is said to enable people to enter a higher state of mind. Chapter 313, Magic can't do it, but fairy tales can. The next morning, Ino quietly opened his eyes, his body clock ticking, and then vanished. The air in the Sanctuary Valley was damp. He could smell the scent of earth, perhaps because Lantern had just finished watering the trees. After washing up in the Valley House, Ino walked to the snow-covered path. He had rarely visited the valley since its creation, but the ice flower and the icy anaconda had always been his companions. But today, with nothing else to do, he took a leisurely stroll around the area. The red maple trees beside the path, their leaves once inscribed with stories from the continent of Arad, swayed gently as he drew closer, their leaves, covered in inscriptions, like greetings from long-lost friends. Ino reached out and gently patted the trunk, a silent response. But it wasn't just the red maple trees that offered greetings, the ice flowers and anacondas were there, too. The anaconda, in particular, had grown considerably in size after a long absence, reaching a length of 70 feet. Its icy blue body, richly textured scales, and impassive demeanor gave it a cold-blooded, ruthless demeanor. Snakes, though crawling and slithering along the ground, looked different when they lifted their heads. The anaconda was no different. When it stopped swimming and raised its head, the overwhelming sense of giant fear, peering down from over 6 meters above, crept in. But these were only feelings towards strangers. At that moment, not only within the shelter, but simply from the creation of ice and snow, Ino possessed absolute control over the anaconda. He ignored the anaconda and decided to check on the ice flower ahead. A moment later, Ino arrived in front of the ice flower and leaned over to gaze. What was once a seedling with only a few leaves is now lush and full of branches, over 2 feet tall, looking as pure and beautiful as a work of art. However, unlike before, the ice flower has not only matured, but has also formed an ice blue bud, making it even more pleasing to the eye. The ice flower's maturity seems unexpected, but it's also reasonable. Considering that during the last Middle-earth experience, 10 years alone were enough for many of the valley's magical herbs to grow, there's no reason the ice flower wouldn't remain unchanged. Moreover, as the sanctuary's earliest plants, this time span is far longer than 10 years. Gazing at the work of art before him, a faint sense of familiarity washed over him. Ino reached out and gently touched the ice flower's leaves, but the moment their contact occurred, a flood of information flooded his mind. Honestly, after so much time had passed, he had gained a certain understanding of this strange flower. He had even speculated that it was likely a magical escape weapon. However, the message the ice flower conveyed after its bud formed confirmed this. This flower is a backup plan for resurrection or escape. The White Witch also seemed to have achieved resurrection through this method, but she ultimately failed, or perhaps the method was inherently imperfect. A clear example is the simultaneous appearance of Lena and the White Witch in Rohan's blacksmith shop. He initially dismissed it as a magical effect. Now, after understanding the function of the ice flower, he's contemplated a difference. The most striking difference is the personalities. One has ruled Narnia for centuries, while the other, while aloof, lacks the dignity of a king. This isn't a joke, but a genuine experience, like the same person portraying Merlin and King Arthur, a stark contrast. Ino initially believed that the White Witch's personality had been weakened by the control of Sanctuary, leading to change in her character. But now, it seems this is not the case. It's a bit like a Muggle cloning chamber. The White Witch is Lena, but Lena is not the White Witch. Two sides of the same coin, sharing the same memories. Ino gently stroked the frosted petals, inwardly lamenting the fickleness of fate. Though he felt a little disappointed with the frosted petals after learning about them, he couldn't deny their power. Their effectiveness was undeniable. This was especially true for those who had lost loved ones, or even parents. Most importantly, the magical world possessed souls. The magical world possessed souls. Or rather, the souls of wizards and witches persisted after death. This was undeniable. Whether it was the Hogwarts ghosts, or Harry's encounter with Dumbledore at the Station of the Dead at the end of the story, or the ugly baby who saw Voldemort's spirit, or even his parents during the duel, or Cedric the Great's death, there was so much evidence proving the existence of souls in this world. The soul, combined with the frosted petals, seemed to mend the original imperfections, for it wasn't just the sharing of memories, but also the unity of soul. Gradually, Ino began to think about many things: Gap's law of transfiguration, Gorburt's third law, and the fact that magic couldn't bring the dead back to life. But just because magic couldn't do something didn't mean fairy tales couldn't. A brief moment of contemplation. A rough idea had already formed in Ino's mind, the key being that the ice flower wasn't a disposable item, as Lena proved. However, after coming to terms with the idea, he began calculating the time. Planted during first grade summer vacation, budded at the start of fourth grade, with 5 journeys into fantasy worlds in between, plus the final 10 years in Middle-earth. He'd never know if he didn't calculate, but after some silent calculations, he realized it had taken nearly 20 years for the bud to form, and it hadn't even matured yet. He could put aside the time frame for now. After all, he could afford to wait. However, the most crucial challenge remained the sanctuary's mechanisms. No matter what, it was an unavoidable problem. Even a legendary wizard like the White Witch couldn't escape control. But then he thought, no matter how many drawbacks there were, the advantages outweighed them all. Compared to true regret, the so-called control was a joke. In the face of life and death, these issues were nothing. Of course, this also required mutual consent. What a surprise! Ino sighed, rising to his feet. It had been a simple stroll, but the rewards were unimaginable. Similarly, today's harvest made him feel like fate was like eating BB's every flavor beans. You never knew what the next one would taste like. It really was like that, just like how he had once naively believed that when the ice flower bloomed, a beautiful flower fairy would be born. But in reality, nothing in life was what we imagined. Chapter 314, Invitation from Madame Maxime. After leaving the sanctuary and returning to his dormitory, Ino also drew back the curtains of his bed. He glanced back at the alarm clock. 7:50 a.m. Unconsciously, he had spent nearly an hour in the sanctuary valley. He glanced at the still sleeping Draco before leaving the dormitory. Between 8 and 9 in the morning, breakfast was served in the Hogwarts kitchens. Although he held the power of a quasi-headmaster, Ino didn't intend to overuse it unless necessary. Since he was a student, he should behave like a student, following the rules. That way, he wouldn't be annoying in any story. Perhaps it was Monday, or perhaps there were foreign guests at the castle. Anyway, he arrived at the Great Hall on time and, at a glance, saw that the 4 long tables belonging to the house were already occupied. The Slytherin table. As Ino sat down, a standard breakfast appeared on the table. The food on the plate was surprisingly abundant. Besides croissants, jam, and honey, breakfast also included a delicious breakfast roll, made with pastry, eggs, bacon, and vegetables, served with salad and ketchup for a variety of flavors. Next to the roll was a sliced French sandwich, featuring butter, cheese, a fried egg, and lettuce, a combination that was mouth-watering just by looking at it. Gazing at the delicious food, Ino silently sighed at the apparent expense of appearances before picking up his cutlery and enjoying his meal. Time slipped by quietly as they ate. After finishing the last bite of his sandwich, Ino gently wiped his mouth with his napkin. He felt several eyes simultaneously directed his way. He set his napkin down and looked up. A tall girl, not far away, was approaching. All the other eyes followed her steps. What a shame. This is such a disappointment. Ino sighed in frustration. He knew who the girl was, Fleur Delacour, the most beautiful girl in the original story, the school belle of Buxbattens. But what made him feel utterly ashamed was the behavior of the Hogwarts boys. Every one of them seemed to have their eyes glued to Fleur. If they liked her, they should have done so openly, admiring beauty. There was nothing wrong with that. Instead, they all peeked furtively, the most obvious being the ones at the Gryffindor table. They took a bite, stole a glance, then pretended to wipe their mouths. Their supposed secrecy turned out to be incredibly conspicuous. Perhaps the only upside was that all the boys in the castle were peeking, so everyone was on the same page, no one laughing at each other. Horizontal ellipsis. Elsewhere, Fleur's gaze had been fixed on the man at the opposite table. When he looked up, she returned his gentle smile and quickly walked over. "Good morning, Mr. Swinburne. I'm so sorry to interrupt your meal." Fleur's English wasn't perfect, and she sounded a bit talkative, but with her charm, everything seemed trivial. "Good morning, miss. But as you can see, I've already finished breakfast," Ino replied calmly, his gaze fixed squarely on Furring's face. She wasn't as stunning as the stories described, but she was certainly beautiful. Her slender figure, paired with waist-length silver hair, gave her an air of mystery and a strange allure. As Ino gazed at Furring stared back. Their eyes met, and Furring detected no trace of infatuation, only admiration. This admiration, however, was mostly focused on her hair. This realization left her feeling somewhat disheartened, but it also reminded her grandmother of her childhood advice: when a person is irresistible, unoffensive, and unshakable, there is something captivating about him. Time had passed, and Furring had initially thought it was a joke. After all, she hadn't found an irresistible man in all those years. But today's encounter suddenly made her realize that her grandmother's words held true truth. A pair of amber eyes, devoid of a trace of lust, were pure and bright. And this purity wasn't like the innocence of a baby. It was as if, after absorbing all the world's experiences, it had still chosen that purity. 17-year-old Fleur, perhaps somewhat experienced, naturally shifted her gaze after a brief eye contact. Even in open and romantic France, staring at a boy you just met for the first time was considered impolite. "My name is Fleur Delacour," Fleur introduced herself after taking a seat. "Very well, Miss Delacour." Ino nodded slightly, then looked across the long table. "Excuse me, how may I help you?" "I'm here to deliver a letter." Fleur pulled a delicate envelope from her pocket and gently placed it on the table. "This is from Professor Maxime." "Thank you," Ino replied politely, looking at the envelope on the table. He wasn't surprised by the letter from Miss Maxime. As the headmistress of Occlumency, he probably wouldn't get to see the legendary alchemist much of the time. But Nico was busy dealing with the inheritance, so naturally, the two of them had to interact. "Here's the letter. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave," Fleur said, standing up with a faint smile. She was curious about the boy before her, but she also had her own pride. Hearing this, Ino politely stood up and said goodbye. "Very well. Thank you again, Miss Delacour." He didn't intend to dwell too much on Fleur, not out of fear of trouble or because he thought she wasn't pretty, but rather because of England's inherent tradition and conservatism. A charming 17-year-old woman, and from open-minded France. Life isn't a fairy tale, and it's probably not so pure and innocent. As Fleur left, Ino noticed the sudden shift in attention. With a quiet chuckle, he picked up the letter from the table. He opened the envelope, and was greeted by the standard cursive English script, which honestly was quite appealing. Remember, before opening the letter, he had even considered finding a French translator. The letter wasn't long, and as he read it, he began to understand Madame Maxime's intentions. A few minutes later, as expected, Ino put the letter down, finally certain Nicole had said something. Otherwise, the headmistress of Occlumency wouldn't have written such a letter filled with politeness and courtesies, even laced with vague invitations. Though subtle, the invitation was clear, practically a letter of offer, inviting him to join Occlumency and promising him a direct position as alchemy professor upon graduation. Madame Maxime's intentions were sincere, but Hogwarts had outmaneuvered her. Despite his refusal, Ino still planned to find an opportunity to meet the half-blood headmistress and to give Occlumency a copy of Nicole's books. After all, that was his original promise. Chapter 315, Warriors of the Goblet of Fire. That day, after the final herbology class of the afternoon, Ino followed the Slytherins out of the greenhouse. Of all the classes he'd taken so far, he felt he'd only learned new things in herbology and potions. Everything else, whether transfiguration, charms, or even the elective ancient runes, seemed like a waste of time. But regardless, students were supposed to attend classes and study. The seemingly boring campus life now would become a dream come true in the future. Perhaps because the champions would be announced today, everyone hurried back to the castle. Time quickly turned to evening. The banquet was supposed to be at 8 p.m., but after 7 p.m., the castle was deserted. Everyone from Hogwarts and the other two schools had gathered in the Great Hall, chatting, playing wizard's chess, or gobstones. In short, no one was idle. Inside the Great Hall, Draco sat confidently on a stool, not only discussing various hot topics but also glancing towards the Gryffindor table from time to time. He knew Ino had entered his name into the Goblet of Fire, and his previously held heart finally settled. With his worries free, he naturally enjoyed his meals and drinks, his sense of relaxation evident. Perhaps too much so. Draco's performance drew a lot of attention, including from the other Slytherins. What's wrong with him? He looks like a crab with his leash untied. Daphne, though somewhat bewildered, watched the performance with amusement. Ho ha ho ha, he's so cheerful because he's not under any pressure, Pansy chuckled, picking up the conversation. In her opinion, Draco was incredibly predictable, and considering the previously heated bet incident, the answer was clear. Thinking of this, Pansy turned slightly, glancing across the table. Feeling someone's gaze, Ino also looked up. Seeing Pansy, he gave her a faint smile. But he quickly turned his head and looked to the side. Draco, if I were you, I wouldn't go over there now. If you really cause trouble and get people thrown abroad, even Professor Snape can't protect you. Seriously. When Professor McGonagall gets serious, no one can afford to mess with her. In just a few minutes, he'd heard something quite absurd. Believing his victory was certain, Draco actually planned to bring oil and crab to taunt Ron. At first glance, it seemed like the fruits of victory needed to be seasoned with sarcasm. But honestly, given the excitement in the Great Hall, an argument could easily ensue. If a fight broke out and escalated into a brawl, Professor McGonagall would not let anyone off lightly. Meanwhile, Draco, previously soaring in confidence, visibly deflated like a frost-bitten eggplant at the mention of Professor McGonagall's name. While Draco's mirth had faded, someone at the Gryffindor table was equally delighted. Really? Someone bumped into a pillar again today? Unbelievable. Hermione happily chatted with her roommate, sharing her opinions despite the topics she had no interest in. Parvati, a neutral and kind person, didn't mind chatting with anyone, but Hermione's unusual behavior today surprised her. You're not. I mean, you shouldn't like hearing this, so why the sudden change today? Parvati looked puzzled. It's not a change, it's just that I feel like saying something when I'm happy. Hermione replied with a smile. A chance encounter in the corridor this afternoon had revealed Ino's thoughts. And as it stood, even Parvati, the most well-informed, didn't know about it, meaning she was the only one in Gryffindor who knew. Although it was a small matter, Hermione was still happy, and she also planned to brew some potions before the match and find an opportunity to send them to Ino. In the bustling atmosphere, time slipped by unnoticed. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. With the arrival of several headmasters and ministry officials, the Great Hall gradually quieted. Under everyone's gaze, Dumbledore stood. As if aware of everyone's anticipation, he dispensed with a tedious opening and decisively waved his wand. Suddenly, hundreds of candles dimmed, and the goblet of fire floated in from the side hall. As it landed steadily on the table, the bluish-white flames suddenly erupted with brilliance, soaring 3 feet high and transforming from bluish-white to dazzling orange-red. Sparks flew, and a half-scorched piece of parchment flew out. Catching the falling paper, Dumbledore read out its contents before the crowd's gaze. Victor Krum, the champion of Durmstrang. His words were met with thunderous applause. Mr. Krum. Please wait in the adjacent room for a moment. Dumbledore pointed to a door behind the head table. Following Krum's departure, a short moment later, another piece of parchment floated out of the goblet of fire. Boxbuttons, Fleur-de-Lis. The applause in the Great Hall was noticeably weaker than Krum's, but the Hogwarts boys clapped enthusiastically, their hands sometimes reddening without even realizing it. Fleur, upon hearing her name, stood up with delight and glided between 2 tables with a nimble step, her silver hair gently tossing behind her head. Even this simple gesture caught the attention of many in the Great Hall, who only slowly recovered their composure after her graceful figure disappeared through the door. It seemed foreseeable that today's scene would be etched in the minds of many boys, unforgettable for the rest of their lives. With the 2 champions chosen, the next step was self-evident. Unlike the earlier spectators, everyone in the Great Hall was now tense. This time, it was the Hogwarts champion. The flames rose once more, this time carrying not parchment but lined notebook paper. Others might not notice the difference, but Dumbledore, closest to the scene, saw it clearly. Although he already knew the answer, a faint smile crossed his face at the sight of the paper. Finally, the champion of Hogwarts. Dumbledore lifted the slip of paper and read aloud, Ino Swinburne. The Great Hall erupted in applause once again, far more intense than the previous 2 appearances. In the head table, Professor McGonagall's mouth dropped open in surprise, but then she murmured excitedly, I knew he wouldn't, He wouldn't just abandon me like that. Ino smiled, stood up, and slowly made his way towards the head table amid the applause. However, just as he reached the door, the goblet of fire changed color again. Seeing this, Ino stopped decisively, his gaze darting towards the head table. The inertia of fate seemed to be fully demonstrated in this moment. But what made him curious was the reason behind it. Mad-Eye Moody was the real deal, and the other people present also didn't notice anything unusual. Moreover, unlike the goblet of fire that took a week in the original story, this time it was only a day, and he didn't think anyone could be so bold as to do something. Most importantly, he and Dumbledore stayed in the side hall until late last night. Suddenly, a seemingly incompetent person suddenly appeared in his mind. Thinking of this, Ino no longer stopped in the hall, but turned and walked towards the room at the back. No wonder the confounding charm was mentioned last night. Although there were no major changes in the personnel, Coyote promised that he would definitely present a different goblet of fire. It's almost there, really. Finally, I still ask for votes. Please vote. Please vote. Chapter 316 The Fourth Warrior. With the appearance of the fourth parchment, Ino finally had the answer. Many details from the past suddenly connected. During the summer vacation, Voldemort's 2 remaining Horcruxes were collected. After the start of school, Mad-Eye Moody, the new gamekeeper, even Harry's progress in learning Occlumency. Everything seemed unrelated, yet upon closer inspection, a faint connection emerged. Ino was now certain that last night's chance encounter had been a beautiful misunderstanding. Perhaps Dumbledore, too, had intended to cheat under the moonlight, but hadn't anticipated someone else getting there first. The only uncertainty he had was whether his impromptu change of heart was part of the headmaster's plan, or whether it wouldn't affect the plan, regardless of who became the champion. With a hint of doubt, Ino pushed open the door. He was greeted by a simply furnished, rectangular wooden room. There was a long fabric sofa, several high-backed chairs, and a high-legged round table, not much else. The light was dim, with only 2 trident candlesticks smeared along the walls providing a feeble illumination. Everything seemed rather shabby. Ino was speechless at the scene before him. He wondered where all the money went to Hogwarts. It was like the slippery path they'd taken on the boat in their first year, completely dark, with so little effort put into installing a single magical lamp. Just as he was mentally grumbling, he heard slightly rusty English. Mr. Swinburne. Fleur, though late to the party, was the first to react, immediately rising and greeting with a smile. Crumb, a half-beat behind Fleur, also rose and greeted. I knew it. Great. We're on the same stage again. His unpretentious words, coupled with his honest smile, easily endeared him to others. Even the mere mention of on the same stage seemed to draw them closer. But Ino found it all a bit amusing. After all, someone who could think about what would happen 10 years into the future before graduation, and even resort to cleverly complaining when their requests were met with no response, surely wouldn't be as simple and honest as they appear. And then there's the goblet of fire. Without external interference, it's truly impartial. It's safe to say that the 3 people present, chosen as champions, representing Europe's 3,000-year-old schools, are all incredibly talented. Of course, Boxbutton's and Durmstrang's numbers are somewhat exaggerated. After all, with fewer attendees, it's easy to overlook those who appear low-key but truly exceptional. After a brief moment of thought, Ino responded politely as Crumb finished speaking. I'm honored to be a champion with you, Miss Delacour and Mr. Crumb. While the 3 exchanged pleasantries in the room, a strange atmosphere took hold in the great hall. Silence, absolute silence. As the goblet of fire released its 4th piece of parchment, the vast great hall was filled with the sound of a pin drop. Not only the students below, but even those in the guest seats were stunned, as if no one had anticipated such a sudden turn of events. The parchment fluttered freely, and Dumbledore instinctively caught it in his hands, frozen in astonishment. After a brief silence, he faithfully read out the name, Harry Potter. There was no school prefix, just a brief first name followed by a surname. But no one paid attention to these details now, as everyone waited for an explanation. Similarly, as Harry's name was read out, there was no applause or cheering in the great hall. The previous silence was gradually broken, and a buzzing sound began, signaling the beginning of a discussion. Many in the great hall also looked at Harry in confusion, including those around him, Neville, Ron, and even more. Their expressions were strangely uniform, each one a look of disbelief. This has nothing to do with me, Harry said blankly. 3 wizarding schools suddenly produced a 4th champion. Even a fool could tell something was amiss, and Harry was no exception, immediately resorting to self-defense. We all know. Ron glared, then forced a smile. But this is good news. Congratulations, Harry. Despite his words, Ron felt a bitter streak inside, like a friend who'd been through thick and thin together, only to be told off one day that he was just trying to experience life. It's not a matter of congratulations. Don't you see something's wrong? Harry suddenly roared, his eyes reddened, perhaps from the emotion. This sudden change also caught the attention of those in the guest seat. Snape frowned and looked down. Professor McGonagall stood up in panic and quickly walked towards Dumbledore. Unlike Ino, whose strength and reputation were obvious to all, Professor McGonagall absolutely disapproved of Harry becoming a champion, a student who had even copied transfiguration assignments. But in this situation, she knew she had to do something. The safety of the students and the reputation of Hogwarts weighed heavily on her heart. Seeing Professor McGonagall approach, Dumbledore spoke first. Minerva, listen to me. This matter needs to be discussed, but not now. Glancing around, Dumbledore finally looked at the bewildered Harry. Harry Potter, please proceed to the room adjacent to the Great Hall. Hearing Dumbledore's voice, Harry, as if awakened from a dream, stood up from his stool and stumbled toward the back of the Great Hall. Looking at the astonished faces around him, Hogwarts felt strangely unfamiliar to him, as if he had never belonged there. Similarly, as Harry stood up to leave, the Great Hall erupted in discussion. The Hufflepuff Badgers, in particular, were already devastated that Cedric was left out, but with Ino Swinburne as the champion, they couldn't say anything. After all, whether it was last year's Dementors and Blue Phoenix, or this year's World Cup and Red Phoenix, they had all proven their excellence, as detailed in the Daily Prophet. Yet, Harry Potter, hailed as the savior, seemed to possess no distinguishing qualities beyond a brief first-year success. His grades and abilities were mediocre, his only real strength seemingly in Quidditch. This achievement might have been remarkable in the past, but with the Quidditch World Cup's professional seeker in front of him, Harry's seeker status barely made a dent. Listening to the chatter behind him, Harry pushed open the wooden door symbolizing honor as if fleeing. Silence. Dumbledore's voice, magically carried throughout the Great Hall, its resounding wave drowning out all the chatter. There's been a minor incident, but we will resolve it. Dinner is now adjourned. Prefects, lead everyone back to their respective house common rooms in an orderly manner. As Dumbledore finished his words, all the prefects from the 4 houses rose to their feet, their authority long established. At the same moment, after Harry opened the door, he was met with the same curious and astonished looks. Such looks made him feel embarrassed, but fortunately, there were other looks. Harry, don't worry, Professor Dumbledore will take care of everything. Ino stood up and whispered a reassuring voice. Others might not understand, but he knew that Harry was like a ticking time bomb. Chapter 317, Disagreement, Showmanship, and Compromise. At the back of the Great Hall, in a dimly lit room, upon seeing Harry, Ino immediately offered comfort. He had no choice. As previously mentioned, unlike the original story's timeline for the destruction of the Horcruxes, all of the Horcruxes, except for the notebook, were destroyed after Voldemort's resurrection. During the Triwizard Tournament, Voldemort used Harry's blood to resurrect, freeing himself from Lily's protective magic and establishing a connection between him and Harry. Now, however, things were different. Before Voldemort could connect with Harry, he had already destroyed 3 Horcruxes, including the notebook, in a surprising and unexpected manner. Add to that the prophecy of Trelawney, whether true or false, and Harry felt a sense of alarm. At the same time, after Ino's soothing words, Harry relaxed completely. His previously suppressed emotion seemed to have been greatly relieved. Thank you, Ino. Harry nodded slightly. You're right. And there's Professor Dumbledore, he'll take care of everything. That's right. Don't worry. Seeing the man relax, Ino nods his mind and leaves the rest of the comforting work to Dumbledore. But it's really dim in here. You can't even be bothered to install a magic lamp, Kruber. Ino smiled, changing the subject and gently calling out to the Phoenix. A flash of orange light appeared, and Kruber's appearance, like a small magic lamp, brought a touch of warmth to the room, dispelling the previous gloom and oppression. Harry, too, felt a sense of relief upon seeing the Phoenix. As for the other 2 people in the room, Krum remained unchanged, still wearing a warm smile. Fleur, on the other hand, showed a more pronounced expression. She rested her chin on one hand, staring intently at the suddenly appeared phoenix. Just then, a conversation drifted closer from outside the door. Albus, I need an explanation. Yes, I will. It sounded like an argument, but before anyone could fully comprehend, the door opened again. The moment the door opened, Ino turned to look. Several people entered the room: Dumbledore, Madame Maxime, Karkaroff, the two directors of the Ministry of Magic, Professor McGonagall, and, finally, a calm Snape. Harry. It's all right, child. Leave everything to us. Professor McGonagall entered the room and immediately went to Harry's side. Thank you, Professor. I'm much better. Harry's voice was low, perhaps due to voice change or perhaps due to emotional distress, always sounding a little weak. This seemingly ordinary reply caused Snape's steps to pause. As the most relaxed person in the room, Ino naturally noticed this subtle change, and the corners of his mouth unconsciously curled up slightly. But the smile quickly faded, as a pair of empty eyes appeared in his sight. Snape walked over silently and sat down in a chair beside him. Ino turned his head and carefully examined Crabbe's shoulder, each orange-red feather clearly visible. The changes in several people took only a few seconds. Inside the room, Karkaroff launched into another attack. I await your explanation, otherwise. I regret coming to Hogwarts. This is supposedly a fair Triwizard tournament, and yet Hogwarts is so unfair. After Karkaroff finished speaking, Madame Maxime, though silent, nodded slightly to indicate her opinion. At 15 feet tall, even seated, Madame Maxime commanded considerable attention, so this subtle nod was noticed by everyone in the room. Seeing support, Karkaroff's expression grew even more confident. In comparison, Dumbledore seemed a little frail. Ino watched the headmaster's argument. Although he knew it was all staged, he couldn't bear Karkaroff's sarcastic remarks, even if he was right this time. Professor Karkaroff. Ino slowly stood and walked towards the headmasters. This action briefly silenced the arguing in the room, and Dumbledore, needless to say, smiled and turned away. Elsewhere, Madame Maxime also nodded in greeting. Even without waiting for a reply, she was happy to extend a courtesy. After all, they might become colleagues in the future. Of the three headmasters present, two had made their stance clear through their actions. Karkaroff, though reluctant, could only pause his complaints and wait to see what the other party had to say. Professors. Here's what I think. The Goblet of Fire's decision is irreversible. Harry must participate in all the matches. Ino said calmly. Although addressing the three headmasters, his gaze remained fixed on Karkaroff. However, Karkaroff, who had been so vocal, strangely remained silent. Instead, he listened politely, as if waiting for the next words to be spoken. This seemingly contrasting scene was taken for granted by Snape. The plain robes, the dark green Slytherin edging, the elegant demeanor, the calm tone, everything was alike, not to mention the phoenix on his shoulders. If Karkaroff had dared to object, he would have been surprised. Meanwhile, on the other side, although Ino didn't understand Snape's thoughts, he smiled in response to Karkaroff's politeness. Family matters matter to each other. Dumbledore was at fault in this matter. No matter how justified the argument, Hogwarts was the first to violate the rules. Unjust is unjust, no matter who debates. To act cowardly and even use force to force Karkaroff to submit would be treading on Hogwarts's 1,000-year-old reputation, and they would have to spit on it afterwards. To avoid this, Ino spoke slowly again. Professors, here's what I've considered. According to Professor Dumbledore, the Goblet of Fire is scored by 5 judges. Since Hogwarts has an extra judge, we can take the average of Harry and I as the final score. I think this will demonstrate the fairness of the Goblet of Fire. After all, it's a fair competition. As Ino spoke, he looked at the 3 headmasters, except for Madame Maxime, who was sitting alone in a chair due to her height. The remaining 2, Dumbledore and Karkaroff, remained standing throughout the discussion. To enhance his persuasiveness, Ino glanced past the 3 of them, towards the burning 3-pronged candlestick on the wall. Reaching out and gently snapping his fingers, the candlestick split into 2 faint flames, which floated towards him in midair. As everyone watched, the flames transformed into snowflakes, and as they landed, 2 high-backed chairs emblazoned with the Hogwarts coat of arms appeared out of thin air. Professors. Please take a seat. Ino bowed slightly and returned to his previous seat. Everything was settled. He didn't believe anyone present knew what was going on. He cast spells silently and wandlessly, performing levitation spells, elemental transformations, and transfiguration magic. It was a blatant display of skill. Even if Karkaroff stubbornly persisted, Madame Maxime probably wouldn't support him. However, everyone present, with the exception of Harry, knew what was going on. Professor McGonagall looked proud. Transfiguration had played a significant role in the magic she had just performed. At the same time, with the appearance of two high-backed chairs, the three headmasters also had different expressions: Dumbledore's relief, Madame Maxime's appreciation. As for Karkaroff, he was more like a defeated rooster, saying nothing as if he had accepted his fate. Zyodi is very sorry that there are only 2 pictures today. I didn't go to bed until 3 or 4 o'clock last night. Myra gave birth to 3 beautiful tabby puppies. I was so sleepy today that I couldn't write. But Zyodi promised that I would make up for it in the next 2 days. Finally, please vote. Please vote. Please vote. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318, Storms in the Castle, Daily Life in Diagon Alley. Everything seemed to follow a single principle: compromise. Whether it was a difference of ideologies, a conflict of interests, or even a clash of actions, as long as it didn't reach a deadly standstill, compromise was the only path forward. This principle was also true in the wizarding world. Faced with the unexpected appearance of the 4th champion, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff also chose to compromise and accept. In the end, the 2 headmasters even saw a hint of inquiry in each other's eyes. Perhaps each suspected the other had known of Ina's strength and orchestrated a self-torture scheme to even things out. But whether it was a self-torture scheme or a genuine accident, both were happy to accept the outcome, even overflowing with joy. It was like a student's duel for fun, and then the champion of the previous international wizarding dueling tournament suddenly appeared. The 2 were completely different, and any match would be a sure thing. But now, the champion had his legs restrained by his teammates, making it possible for him to compete. The 3 headmasters reached a consensus. The same resolution was circulated throughout the castle the next day. The wind picked up, bringing a seemingly unprecedented commotion. Even after a week, the chatter in the castle remained undimmed, everyone eagerly discussing the 4th champion. Harry once again became the center of attention, or rather, the subject of discussion. But no matter how much wind blew through the castle, it seemed to drift only through the windows. Deep beneath the castle, in the Slytherin common room, a blessedly quiet place reigned. Ino showed little interest in the gossip. Much had transpired in the past week, but the only thing that garnered his attention was the date for the first event. After a joint consultation among the 5 judges, the date had been set for late November. It was intriguing. The champions were chosen in early October, and the competition began in late November, nearly 2 months apart. He feared that one side might be ill-prepared. Ino had no intention of questioning Dumbledore's plans. It was pointless. Dumbledore would readily share what he truly needed to know, and pressing for information about what he didn't need would simply add more fodder. Since the old headmaster was willing to take the lead, he was content to be free from many matters. In the Slytherin dormitories, Ino shed his plain robes and donned the spider silk blue gown he'd worn before. A week slipped by, and today arrived at the time he'd agreed to meet Marcus. "Ino, do you think I need to go?" Draco hesitated, then tentatively asked. "You?" "My answer is, whatever. If you want to go, go. If you don't, just rest in the dorm. As a shareholder, you're entitled." After a brief moment of reflection, Ino replied to Draco's question. "Then I won't go. I have nothing to do there anyway." Draco breathed a sigh of relief, now thankful he wasn't heavily involved in the operations. It's not as serious as you think." Ino saw through Draco's thoughts. In truth, he didn't suspect anyone until he saw proof. To suspect a partner and lose his temper based solely on Chrome's one-sided account would be foolish. While it's possible not to suspect, it's also necessary to pay attention. Chrome's words also reminded him of something. While a shared interest is strong, it also requires equal status. As Ino prepared to depart, far away on Diagon Alley's main street, the atmosphere in a shop covering approximately 100 square meters was subdued. The video mirror shop had originally belonged to the Malfoy family, but Draco later acquired it as a shareholder. The shop was divided into 2 floors. The first floor was used for business, and the second floor was a standard storage warehouse. This might be a bit of a waste of space, but when there wasn't a sufficient supply or a wide variety of goods, concentrating everything on the first floor was the most sensible. At this moment, the first floor was still operating normally. Although the shop was a bit deserted, the shelves were also sparsely stocked. This prompted the only 2 young employees on the first floor to slack off, each with a bag of BBB every flavor beans, chatting idly. The 2 employees, a man and a woman, looked no more than 20 years old, and the woman, in particular, looked like she had just graduated from Hogwarts. "Penelope, you said they're coming to the store all at once instead of focusing on increasing production. Did something big happen? Or are they going bankrupt?" The male clerk sat behind the counter, his face full of curiosity and inquiry, but more of a look of boredom. "I don't know." Penelope turned and said calmly, "But, Mr. Flint, you're well aware of the situation here. Orders from all over the world are booked until next year. If your cousin knew you were anticipating bankruptcy." "No. I was just saying it casually." Linley Flint suddenly sobered up. As an underappreciated branch of the Flint family, he was all too familiar with the methods of the purebloods. The image of Marcus, his smiling face concealing a hidden coldness, flashed through his mind. "In that case, then stop talking nonsense. If you really have nothing to do, just lie down and sleep." Penelope turned away from her colleague who had listened to her advice. With just a casual remark, he actually fell asleep on the table. But even so, she had no other options. She had assumed that as Ravenclaw prefect and head girl of the Hogwarts Student Council, she would at least secure a respectable job after graduation. However, reality taught her a lesson. Muggle-borns had no place in the Ministry of Magic. Any respectable job was stigmatized, and the seemingly public nature of it was merely a public explanation. Even the Centaur Liaison Office, a perpetually secluded department, was still dominated by half-bloods. If one path doesn't work, try another. Penelope gazed at the stairs leading to the second floor. It seemed as if some people were born to be upstairs, while she could only stay beneath them. Even the mere fact of being beneath them was only possible thanks to Percy's connections. Penelope felt a strange sense of irony. It seemed as if everything in the castle was a dream. The power and glory of being a prefect, after leaving Hogwarts, all the achievements were nothing compared to a fleeting surname. If I had known, I wouldn't have fought for it. The academy's past now seemed absurd. Some people she once looked down upon have now become respectable, while she, the female president of the student union, has become just a shop assistant. Although her monthly income is considerable, she is still essentially a waitress. Chapter 319 First Board Meeting. As Penelope sighed, a strange atmosphere took over the second floor of the shop. The area, over 100 square meters, had originally been used as a warehouse, but now it was neatly tidy. A long table, nearly 20 feet long, sat in the center, with 12 high-backed chairs on each side. Wherever a Hogwarts professor was present, one could tell that the chairs were occupied by former, famous students of the castle. Marcus Flint, Mina Burke, even Percy Weasley, with his short red hair. All of them had been involved in the operation of the videoscope. I feel like this is a bit sudden. Does anyone know the reason? Marcus sat in his chair, looking around. He seemed to be asking with a smile, but his eyes were cold. But this behavior only frightened the young wizards of the castle. None of the 11 people present cared, and they all turned a blind eye. Just as the conversation was about to get awkward, Mina Burke, the former Slytherin head girl, eased the atmosphere. Don't ask. If anyone knows, everyone will. Otherwise, you could ask Malfoy, he knows it best. I asked, but he wouldn't say. Marcus explained with a smile when someone else took up the conversation. Percy sat in his chair, quietly watching the two perform. Marcus and Mina, one in charge of Diagon Alley and the other of Nocturne Alley. Their conversation was clearly a test of the others, but unfortunately, there were no fools present. Everyone tacitly remained silent. Time slipped by in this slightly awkward atmosphere. Fast. Everyone in the second floor shop felt a faint chill. A flash of blue light flashed, and a figure suddenly appeared in the room. A familiar voice echoed in everyone's ears, "Sorry to have kept you waiting." Ino smiled at the familiar figure in the room and nodded in greeting. But his smile and politeness were in vain. As everyone present unconsciously lowered their heads. A single glimpse of the blue phoenix sent many people face to face with a curse and death. Oh. Sorry. I forgot about Fighty's special ability. But there's nothing I can do. As you all know, the fireplaces in the school dormitories aren't connected to the Flu network. Ino spoke slowly, but with genuine emotion, each word brimming with sincerity. Looking at the 12 shareholders involved in the operation, who lowered their heads, a hint of a smile flickered in Ino's eyes. This was the desired effect. He played the good cop, Fighty the bad cop. Regardless of operational issues, this move was essential. After all, in the pureblood world, reputation was often less effective than strength. Seeing his goal achieved, and adhering to the principle of overdoing it, Ino gently stroked the phoenix's back. Fighty. Go home and play with the little people. You've scared my friends. The blue halo flickered again, and Fighty's figure abruptly vanished. For a long time. With the phoenix's departure, the air on the second floor of the shop still lingered in a chilling atmosphere. But the palpable despair and fear were gone. That's just how it is with Fighty, but everyone, please have some chocolate. It'll be very helpful, Ino said, pulling out the chocolates he had prepared long ago. The chocolates were placed on the table, and in an instant, they multiplied into a large plate, each appearing before everyone. Thank you, Mr. Swinburne. This is the best chocolate I've ever had. Marcus looked at the chocolates before him, unwrapped one, and decisively placed it in his mouth, seemingly oblivious to the magical world's law of not eating anything carelessly. With this initial start, everyone else also began to eat their candy. Perhaps, as Lupin said in the original story, chocolate can help ease the mood. In just a few minutes, the atmosphere on the second floor began to relax. Thank you for the compliment, Marcus, Ino replied with a chuckle, sitting in his chair. Actually, today's meeting is about two things. The first is about Victor Krum, the Bulgarian seeker. He had made a promise about Krum before, and he had to give him a positive response, which was also a way of keeping his word. Here's the thing. Krum contacted me. What are your thoughts on this? After explaining the whole story, Ino fell silent, throwing the question to everyone. At the same time, Marcus sat up straight as if by reflex. No. Believe me. We didn't receive the letter. We really didn't. As for Durmstrang, it's always been their headmaster Karkaroff who's liaising with us. Marcus' tone was a little agitated, but understandable. After all, he had always been responsible for the external business. However, Marcus, in a moment of desperation, replaced I with we, which made everyone present frown. Percy, in particular, gave Marcus a displeased look. He was here to fight for the Weasley family's interests, not to inexplicably share the responsibility. I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't know about this. Mr. Flint handles the correspondence and external sales. Percy's words resonated with the others, and everyone present, except Mina, nodded rapidly. You. Marcus felt insulted, and just as he was about to lose his temper, he saw the face of the host, a gentle smile. Sorry. Please wait a moment. Marcus stood up and walked to a locker in the corner of the room. A moment later, a pile of letters and a thick notebook were placed on the table. This is all the correspondence with Karkaroff, and this is the sales invoice after the World Cup. The advance payment, orders, and quantities are all recorded here in detail. Oh, and there's truth serum. I'd be happy to drink it. Marcus said in a huff, feeling betrayed. Everything was fine before, but when something went wrong, Mina was the only one who trusted him among the 12 people. Hearing about Veritaserum, Ino frowned slightly. He knew that if he gave Marcus Veritaserum, the business would be over, not to mention the favors he'd have with old Flint and Newt. Veritaserum wasn't an option, but the accounts could be checked. Besides, his intuition told him that Marcus didn't seem to be lying, nor did he have any reason to. As one of the few remaining pure-blood families, if the Flints had been so short-sighted, they would have been eliminated by history long ago. Just like when old Flint released his records and books, he'd willingly lost money to sell them in exchange for a favor. Thinking of this, Ino made a decision. Don't mention Veritaserum. We're all friends. As for Krum's situation, I think something went wrong at Durmstrang, but it has nothing to do with us. He'd initially worried about these people banding together, but now it seemed that among the 12, only Mina and Marcus were closer. Thank you for your trust. Marcus said seriously. No. You've proven yourself with your own actions. Ino gestured to the account books and letters on the table. He wasn't about to accept a favor. Official business had to be handled according to the rules. Marcus wasn't stupid either. Realizing his slip of the tongue, he gave a sheepish smile and stopped talking. Okay, now for the second matter, the Triwizard Tournament. Ino reached out and tapped the table lightly. This is an opportunity. We can release a special commemorative edition, but it's a bit of a challenge. We need to get those two dear directors. Ino expressed his thoughts. In the original story, he had found the Triwizard Tournament a bit boring, especially the last two rounds, which showed no regard for the audience. Hiding underwater, running through mazes, it was as if they were afraid to see people. Now was the perfect opportunity to make the tournament more entertaining. At any rate, they had to remove the underwater event. Chapter 320, Felicity Potion and Ravenclaw Item. Shakespeare once wrote, "He who abandons time, time abandons him." But Ino never agreed with this statement. No matter how much one cherishes time, it will still silently abandon him. A full month and a half had passed since the last meeting in Diagon Alley. It was mid-November, less than 2 weeks before the first match of the Triwizard Tournament. Yet, a sense of restlessness gripped Hogwarts, a feeling that grew more pronounced with each passing day. In the Slytherin dormitory, Ino lazily leaned against the headboard, the soft blanket folded against his back, the white noise of the burning fireplace filing his ears. Everything seemed so beautiful. He had cut down on unnecessary outings. Besides attending classes, he had even stopped going to the library, spending most of his free time in his dormitory. Previously, things had been fine. Although the young wizard's growing restlessness was noticeable, with the other three warriors providing distractions and distraction, everything remained relatively peaceful. But this peace only lasted a month. In late October, something happened that completely caught Ino out. He was awarded the Order of Merlin. Although it was a third-class medal with a white ribbon, awarded for contributions to scholarship or entertainment, his young age was a factor. Since the 12th century, the Order of Merlin had never been awarded to a Hogwarts student. Therefore, this third-class medal was a first. Being a champion of the Triwizard Tournament and the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin, the combination seemed to have a strange effect. While seemingly glorious, it also carried its own burdens. After all, wherever he went, he was either surrounded by onlookers or cheered on. It was fine at first, but after a while, it became exhausting. Because of this, Ino chose to stay completely in his dorm. Even meals were either cooked by Lan or brought back by Draco. Although he didn't go out, he wasn't bored either. Draco would probably share some new stories with him along with his meals every day, as well as the two-way mirror with real-time video. When Ino thought of the two-way mirror, Hermione's face kept popping up in his mind. Although he'd repeatedly told her not to overdo potions, the girl remained stubbornly obedient, like a wound-up alarm clock. Every day, besides classes, she'd retreat to the room of requirement to brew potions. Perhaps. It wasn't just the rooms on the 8th floor that were infested, the Slytherin dormitories had been infected, too. Just as Ino was thinking of the two-way mirror, a vibration echoed from the headboard of his bed. A drawer opened, and a 3-inch mirror slowly flew out, then floated steadily in midair. As soon as the two-way mirror connected, a delighted voice rang out from within. "Ino. I did it. The Felix Felicis potion's duration has been shortened. Thanks to you for telling me about this mysterious room, it's amazing." In the mirror, Hermione spoke excitedly, seemingly too overjoyed to notice the angle of the two-way mirror. "Ahem. Hermione, you could raise the mirror a foot so I can see your cauldron." Ino coughed softly, a calm reminder. The carefree girl truly had no self-preservation skills. "Raise it." Hermione responded skeptically, then glanced at the two-way mirror in front of her. But as her gaze measured the angle, she felt a chill. "Oops. I'll hang up first. I need to add new orbs." Without hesitation, Hermione instantly disconnected the two-way mirror. The mirror was disconnected, but something had already happened. Hermione sat cross-legged on the floor, her face flushing. Although the girls in the dorm always said to show off their strengths, that wasn't the point. Madness. What would Ino think of me? Seriously. I should have gotten a stand a long time ago. Staring at the two-way mirror on the floor, Hermione felt an urge to flick the time turner around her neck, but it was just a thought. She knew it wouldn't work for this kind of situation, as turning back time couldn't alter a person's memories. Horizontal ellipsis. Unlike Hermione, lost in her own self-deprecation, Ino was pondering what he had just heard. The Felix Felicis brewing time has been shortened. This is incredible. He had known for some time that Snape was giving her special treatment, but even so, he was still astonished by Hermione's talent in potions. Felix Felicis, one of the ultimate potion techniques. Even if it was just a matter of shortening the brewing time by a day, one could potentially receive an Order of Merlin. Remember, he had previously been awarded the order alongside Damocles Belby, the creator of the Wolfsbane potion. Furthermore, Belby received the higher-ranking Order of Merlin, a second-class order. By comparison, Newt Scamander, the Master of Magizoology, only received the Order of Merlin, a second-class order with a purple ribbon, after writing Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. This shows how highly regarded achievements in potions are. Horizontal ellipsis. His thoughts drifted. Gradually, Ino thought of the Ravenclaw diadem. Previously, due to lack of relevant information, despite receiving the diadem, he hadn't conducted the corresponding research. But now he had an idea. Perhaps he could gain some inspiration from Hermione's improved elixir of life. In fact, as powerful alchemical tools, the diadem and the elixir of life share a similar function, a state of mind that brings a sense of inner peace. With absolute calm, he entered a state of mind that was at his most effective. The effects were similar, so perhaps they could be applied to similar situations. With this thought, Ino picked up the two-way mirror again, but this time he didn't dial the number in time. The moment he saw the mirror, a flash of white flashed through his mind. Putting himself in her shoes, he realized that as a reserved girl, she probably wouldn't want to be disturbed. Forget it. Let's wait until tomorrow. Putting down the mirror, Ino disappeared back into the dormitory. The Sanctuary's Valley. Thanks to the diligent work of the Blue Lantern, everything here seemed to be flourishing. He had come not to witness the herb harvest, but because he felt a magical calling. In the valley, Ino followed that calling and arrived at a garden of absurd beauty. Here, pebbles picked up by children from Rohan once grew, shimmering with color, buds as pure as crystal. No matter how long I gaze at them, I feel a deep, genuine joy. I'm too late to share my knowledge today. Even so, Zia Odie still wants votes. Please vote, smirk. Chapter 321 Colorful River. There's always a colorful river winding through the fairy tale town, dividing ideals and reality, only to reunite in the valley ahead. Amidst a sea of vibrant flowers, Ino hummed softly. It was truly magical. Though so much time had passed, every time he saw these flowers, he was reminded of that experience. A simple Santa hat, a beautiful glass bottle, or even a piece of candy or two could bring long-lasting joy to those children. Sadly, by the time he next visited Middle-earth, perhaps the children of Rohan would have been crushed by the weight of so-called life. Dividing ideals and reality. Gazing at the vibrant sea of flowers, Ino removed his boots and sat barefoot on the soft earth. He had come here following his instincts, and only then did he realize that the colorful leaves, cut from candy wrappers, shimmered faintly, and the crystal buds nestled among them were like tiny light collectors. From afar, this small garden was always ablaze with light. Walking barefoot to the center of the garden, a 5-foot-tall, slender, elegant tulip stood tall, showcasing its unique beauty. Its silky leaves were smooth and textured. His gaze shifted, and when he once again saw the tulip step, the bud, once again, was still as vibrant as a ruby, brimming with passion and vitality. But Alice, it remained a bud. Faced with this outcome, Ino wasn't overly disappointed. A ring imbued with the laws of Middle-earth, though fortunately gifted generously, was of little use to him without corresponding changes or transformations. Therefore, some things require waiting, perhaps because the more precious something is, the more time it takes. However, after seeing the tulip, Ino was certain that the calling he'd felt earlier must have come from other flowers. Thinking of this, he decided not to leave. He sat barefoot in the garden, quietly gazing at the colorful blossoms. Resting on the soft earth, he inhaled the sweet fragrance of the flowers. Time seemed to have stopped in this tranquility. In that stillness, he lost count of how much time had passed. Soon, a flash of red light rose from the sea of flowers, followed by orange, yellow, green, blue. More and more colors appeared, gathering in buds as pure as crystal. When they matured, they flew into the sky without hesitation. There were as many beams of light as there were flowers. The number of branches, in turn, depended on the number of stones planted. Ino didn't know how many children there were in Rohan at the time, but from morning to dusk that day, He rarely stopped exchanging them, almost to the point of self-service. In the valley sky, more and more beams of light shot up. It was unknown how much time passed until the last beam of light flew out, and the sky gradually gathered into a vast rainbow sea. For a while, this irregular rainbow, as if with a consciousness, slowly stretched and thinned. Finally, it formed a winding, colorful river across the valley sky. Ino sat barefoot on the ground, awestruck by the dreamy scene in the sky. The flowing movement of the rainbow was indescribably beautiful, for it essentially transcended the laws of physical optics, the law of rectilinear propagation. Light can disperse, refract, reflect, and more, but it can never flow in the same winding, twisting patterns as water. The formation of the Rainbow River. The valley's sky becomes a dreamlike beauty. Nestled in the lush greenery, gazing up at the azure sky, a river, like a rainbow, hangs suspended in the heavens. Ino gazed at this scene for a long time. In the end, he laid down on the soft earth, his hands clasped behind his head, just staring up in silence. For now, the Rainbow River in the sky didn't seem to have any special properties. He didn't care. Not everything is judged by its practicality, or its apparent utility. Just like traveling and admiring beautiful scenery, while seemingly meaningless from a practical perspective, travel not only relaxes the mind but also allows people to temporarily escape the rhythm of the past, leaving behind the rut of life and enjoy a brief moment of tranquility. The same was true for Ino. Whenever he returned to the valley and looked up at the sky, he would see the winding Rainbow River. That seemed enough. Time slipped by. He lay in the soft soil for a long moment before sitting up. After confirming the previous call had completely faded, he vanished from the spot. Ino quietly left, but he failed to notice that in the White House in the valley, a small hand quietly opened the box containing Nico's gift of books and dolls. Hogwarts. In the bustling Great Hall, Draco finished his dinner, took out his cutlery, and tapped his plate again. On the table, the old plate vanished, replaced by another, untouched dinner. However, this seemingly absurd behavior became commonplace among the surrounding Slytherins, even the students at Durmstrang. It's worth noting that over the past month and a half, students from the other two magic schools in Europe had gradually integrated into Hogwarts. Now, whether eating or attending classes, they all had designated locations. Durmstrang followed the Slytherin pattern, while Boxburton's chose Ravenclaw. Boxburton's choice, in particular, practically had the boys from the other three houses in the castle beating their chests. After spending some time with her, they'd become even more captivated by the charming Frenchwoman. Every smile, every expression, even a casual toss of her hair, captivated many. Similarly, Fleur, with her exceptional emotional intelligence and social skills, had become a natural fit for the Hogwarts students. She was often seen alongside the senior prefects of the four houses. These exceptional boys, like the Royal Horse Guards of the Queen, were loyal and dedicated. It seemed that many things happened unexpectedly. Just as Draco had picked up his plate and was about to leave, a minor altercation broke out at the third long table on the left side of the Great Hall, belonging to the Gryffindors. I already told you I didn't know. I've told you countless times. Harry slammed his hand on the table in exasperation. Just then, several Hufflepuffs passed by him again, quietly extolling Cedric's excellence. Unlike the original story, while Draco's provocations are missing, and the entire Slytherin family now seems to be less concerned with Harry, Hufflepuff's Badger has become the main force of public opinion. This isn't really about the house, it's human nature. Inequality is more of a problem than a lack of it. The appearance of the fourth champion has truly disrupted the balance. Chapter 322 Control of Human Nature. In the original story, the Badgers didn't challenge Cedric, who was among the champions. But now the situation has reversed. Slytherin, thanks to Ino, has chosen to sit on the sidelines, leaving the burden of conquering Harry to naturally fall on Hufflepuff. Even after a month and a half, the Badgers remain discontent. However, Hufflepuffs are Hufflepuffs after all. While deeply dissatisfied, they haven't done anything out of line, let alone a direct confrontation or personal attacks. But there's one thing, as the castle's most populous house, even if each person only says a few words, the combined force is unnerving. That's how Harry felt right now. He'd had enough. The daily taunts, once enough in the corridors, now robbed him of his peace even while he ate. But just as Harry was about to explode, another voice echoed. If you're dissatisfied with the Goblet of Fire's decision, go to Professor Dumbledore. Go to the two directors of the Ministry of Magic, Insinuating yourself here doesn't demonstrate your courage. Ginny stood up. Though only a third-year wizard, she didn't flinch. She stood in front of Harry, facing several nearby Hufflepuffs alone. Though she looked a little frail, Ginny's presence was no less impressive than the boys. Especially at this moment, her expression and tone were like a lioness protecting her cubs. Seeing Ginny step forward, Hermione didn't hesitate and stood up as well. She didn't have many friends in the castle, perhaps even pitifully few, but among those few, Ginny was undoubtedly one. A chain reaction seemed to have set in. After Ginny and Hermione made their stance clear, Ron, Neville, Seamus, George, Fred, more and more Gryffindors began to express their stance. As the person involved, Harry felt an unprecedented warmth in his heart. The coldness and ridicule of the past month and a half seemed insignificant. Even the rage he had felt just now dissipated in an instant. He always had his friends by his side. Looking at the familiar figures standing in his way, Harry's eyes welled up. At that moment, he felt a strange feeling. As long as he had friends around, nothing was insurmountable. A sense of confidence quietly rose within him. As if sensing something, Ginny, standing in front of him, instinctively glanced back. Their eyes met, and in the tense atmosphere, a different kind of emotion emerged. Meanwhile, across the hall, Draco, observing the Gryffindors' altercation, remained on the sidelines, neither joining in nor leaving. "Draco, should we go over there? There might be a fight." Crabbe approached, his tall frame and innocent expression making him seem like he had a point. "Why should we go over there?" Draco raised his head and glanced at Crabbe, who was standing beside him. "Go by yourself if you want. Ino won't let me near Harry." Even facing the lively scene before him, Draco, after a brief moment of observation, chose to decline. He picked up his dinner and headed out of the hall without a backward glance. As Draco gradually disappeared outside the Great Hall, Crabbe's previously innocent expression dropped, and he stood there, gazing thoughtfully at the Gryffindors. After a moment, a naive smile crept onto his face again. In the Slytherin dormitories. You mean, Harry almost got into a fight, and then a bunch of Gryffindors stepped in front of him. Ino ate his dinner while listening to the news broadcast on his Malfoy recorder. "Well, I didn't leave, but I didn't get close either, but I saw it all." Draco spoke seriously, recounting what he had just seen and heard in the Great Hall. "I just didn't expect George and Fred's sister to be the first to stand up." "Oh, and your Granger, she was the second to stand up." "What do you mean, my Granger? Speak properly." Ino interrupted the news broadcast. It had just been a sneak peek, but suddenly it switched to the entertainment and emotional channel. "I'm speaking properly." Draco adopted a mysterious expression. "Even though you've been hiding in your dorm room all this time, and no one except me knows about your daily chats through the two-way mirror, you know, you can protect yourself but not the other person." Draco recounted his experiences non-stop. During his time away from Harry, he'd found a new hobby, sniffing out all sorts of secret and fascinating things, then sharing them with Ino. "So, your story, spread through the Gryffindor girls, has spread throughout the castle. Now, many girls don't believe in love anymore, because that's the only way you break up." "Stop." Ino interrupted the rambling again, glancing at Draco's excited face. "Honestly, it's a mistake for the Malfoys not to get involved in the newspaper media. If you had started a magazine, maybe it would have become a hit. But sometimes, an unintentional joke can have unexpected effects." Draco was stunned for a moment when he heard about the magazine, then his mind visibly raced. Ino didn't care about Draco's transformation. Now that he'd stopped rambling, he was happy to be free. But today's news gave him another thought, one he hadn't thought before. Perhaps he'd overestimated Dumbledore's power, or perhaps there hadn't been much of a plot at all. Whatever the truth, a brief reconsideration of today's events easily resonated with Harry's transformation. After nearly 2 months of struggle and debate, a man, at his most helpless, suddenly had a group of friends step up and shield him from all attacks. While lacking family, he still had friendship, even love. For Harry, lacking the experience of the first 2 years of the original story, he was inevitably vulnerable, but experiencing extreme joy and sorrow is also the most conducive to growth. Still as wise. Ino couldn't help but sigh softly. If his suspicions were true, Dumbledore had undoubtedly accurately calculated human nature. The headmaster should have known long ago that inequality, not scarcity, is the inevitable source of criticism. But in this case, Dumbledore also trusted in the glimmer of humanity, confident that when Harry was at his most vulnerable and in need, someone would step forward to share his burden. Perhaps this wasn't some perfect plan, but simply a grasp of human nature. Ino found it ingenious no matter how one looked at it. Harry might have suffered a little, but no protagonist in a story is immune to it. Chapter 323, Publish a Magazine of Memories. In the delicate tapestry of life, a thread of a different color sometimes appears unexpectedly. But it's precisely because of these different colored threads that the tapestry of life becomes so colorful. The next morning, after washing up, Ino heard some unexpected news. Are you sure you want to start a magazine? A monthly Hogwarts magazine, at that. I'm sure. I've been thinking about it all night. Draco nodded seriously. Yesterday, after some thought, he suddenly thought that starting a magazine would be a good idea. Initially, it could be published monthly, sharing some gossip and oddities about the castle. It could even be bundled with a video camera, offering not only text but also video content. Seeing Draco's serious expression, Ino said nothing more. It wouldn't cost much. He had also seen the account book that Marcus had brought out during the meeting in Diagon Alley. If he could really complete all those orders, the dividends alone would be enough for Draco to spend as he pleased. If you like it, go for it, but you'll have to put in the effort to gather information. Being too bored will hurt reputation and sales. I've got it all figured out. Pay for information. Draco said confidently. Scarhead's lackey, Colin from Gryffindor, Carl from Ravenclaw. With a string of names, Ino believed Draco's determination. It didn't seem like a whim. Regardless, he thought it was a good thing. Last year, Percy and Penelope had visited together to buy some video mirrors for graduation photos. Actually, that's the way it is in England. Many people leave Hogwarts after 7 years and may never have the chance to enter the castle again. Honestly, it's a bit cruel. Now that Draco has the idea of publishing a magazine, it seems like a good idea. Especially with the two-way mirrors and video footage, it could allow many adult wizards to revisit their youthful days. With this in mind, Ino shared his idea with Draco. Leave it to me. It'll definitely become a mainstream magazine. Draco's tone was filled with pride, but then another thought occurred to him and he asked, by the way, Ino, do you want to invest? We'll do it together. Just the two of us. Sure. I'll invest 500 galleons then. Faced with such a meaningful offer, he wasn't about to refuse. Even a modest 500 galleons would be a token of support for Draco. The bustle inside the castle, the memories outside. Okay. I'll go write the plan now. With a positive response, Draco's heart was filled with excitement. He skipped breakfast and headed decisively for his dorm desk. Although the scene before him felt a bit childish, he wasn't about to discourage her. Okay, then, write well, and we can discuss it together when we have time. While Draco was focused, Ino called out to Kreber. Similarly, with the flicker of a phoenix, the dormitory fell silent. On the 8th floor of the castle. A flash of red light flashed in the right corridor, and Ino arrived in front of the tapestry of a troll beating Barnabas with a club. I need a quiet place to brew potions. He thought to himself, and after passing by it 3 times in a row, a door appeared in the wall. The room of requirement. Hermione was concentrating on the cauldron before her, simmering over a low flame, emitting a faint plume of white smoke. The aroma of brewing Felix Felicis wasn't pleasant, but after a brief adjustment, it was bearable. Entering the room of requirement, Ino was greeted by a beautiful scene. In soft candlelight, Hermione sat quietly before the cauldron, seemingly enveloped in the gentle, soft glow. Her long brown hair draped casually behind her, and she wore a plain robe, thin velvet leggings beneath, and a pair of versatile khaki women's boots. Her attire looked ordinary, but it was Hermione's expression that caught his attention. In her concentration, the young woman's features exuded a calmness and quietness beyond her years. Her potion-making process was equally pleasing to the eye. Her hands moved gently and precisely, each stirring and each measuring performed with meticulous attention to detail. At this moment, Hermione seemed truly absorbed in her own world, or perhaps it was the crucial moment of the potion's preparation. In any case, she hadn't even looked up. Ino, naturally, stood by, making no inappropriate noises. Time slipped by in the silence. A moment later, Hermione made another move in front of the cauldron. She paused stirring, then carefully opened her bag and pulled out several oddly shaped herbs. With each one, Hermione brought it close to her nose for a gentle sniff, her expression as if she were engaging in a silent conversation with the ingredients. Soon, she had expertly placed the selected herbs into the cauldron. When she was done, Hermione looked up. "I'm sorry. I know you're here, but I really couldn't be distracted at that moment," a soft voice echoed through the empty room. Hearing this, Ino remained unfazed. Anyone focused on their work deserves respect. "I'm the one who should apologize. I almost disturbed you." After confirming Hermione wouldn't be busy anytime soon, Ino slowly stepped forward. "You surprised me yesterday. You can actually shorten the brewing time for Felix. You know, the 6-month brewing period has always been the most challenging part of this potion. It's not difficult. But it's not my achievement." Hermione reached out and gently smoothed her hair from her forehead. Her concentration had left her no time to manage her scattered hair. Actually, much of Professor Snape's knowledge about Felix came from him. He had the idea to improve it a long time ago, but for some reason he stopped. At this point, Hermione looked away, a little embarrassed. Ino had actually lied yesterday. Hermione's reaction was apparent, but he didn't think it was wrong. Although they were continuing their research according to the professor's ideas, not everyone had the talent and qualifications. "Can you tell me what's going on?" "Of course. I won't listen for nothing. I'll compensate you with some alchemical knowledge or other means." Ino sat on the floor, his mind already thinking of ways to compensate. Especially seeing Hermione's focused look just now, it made him think that an alchemical doll would undoubtedly be a good exchange. After all, there was no reason why a doll that could serve as an alchemical assistant couldn't also serve as a potion assistant. As for the equivalent exchange of life and vitality, he had also thought about it. At worst, it would be recycled once a year, just as after-sale service. On the other hand, Hermione hurriedly shook her head after hearing about the compensation, and her hair, which had just been straightened, became messy again. Chapter 324, The House of Requests. No need for an exchange. I'm the one who decides. When Professor Snape gave me the notes, he already said that whoever completes them will receive the honor. Hermione bit her lip lightly, a look of stubbornness on her face. Don't be so quick to refuse. You'll see when the time comes, it'll be helpful to you, Ino explained with a smile, then asked, but now I'm curious. How long did you shorten the production of the Felix? The cost increased by 30%, but the time was shortened by a month, just in time for the second game. As if anticipating the question, Hermione blurted out without a second thought. Somehow, hearing this, Ino felt worried about Snape's small coffers. Perhaps because of her Muggle background, Hermione wasn't familiar with some rare medicinal herbs, but he knew that brewing the Felix was a complete waste of money. Hermione, on the other hand, didn't dwell on it. Instead, she continued, there's hope for future cost savings, but I don't have time to think about that right now. But her voice faded mid-sentence, and she finally stopped completely. Though unspoken, Ino guessed what was coming next. Truthfully, while the story's plot had changed, Hermione's personality remained the same. This girl was still as stubborn as ever, perhaps sticking to her guns. Hermione, listen to me. Listen to me first. Hermione decisively interrupted. She knew Ino could guess her thoughts, but she also knew what Ino was going to say next. I know, there are some things you can't take lightly. In 1452, during the Triwizard Tournament at Boxbuttons, a champion died instantly in the battle against the Horned Beast, and 2 professors were injured. In 1530, at Durmstrang, Hermione recited the history of the Goblet of Fire, or rather, the history of casualties. Every 100 or 80 years, there was always a chance of an incident at the Triwizard Tournament. I know, trust me. Even if you don't need the Felix Felicis, bring it with you. Finally, Hermione raised her head, not even glancing away, as she spoke word by word. Humans are not plants, so how can they be heartless? Actually, as Draco said, the answer was obvious from the fact that he had been able to connect to the two-way mirror frequently over the past month and a half. Ino thought carefully, not knowing when his mind had changed. Perhaps it was Hermione waiting alone in the astronomy tower, or perhaps it was because she kept pulling potions out of her pocket like a little hamster. But no matter what, since he had the answer in his heart, he chose to accept Hermione's kindness. Okay. I'll bring the Felicia Felix. A positive answer brought a joyful smile to Hermione's face. What about Harry? Ino suddenly became curious. Although the Iron Triangle was not as close as in the original story, with Hermione's kindness, she probably wouldn't ignore it. Harry. Hermione was stunned, then said somewhat angrily, "He has Professor Snape. I also wanted to ask for a bottle of ready-made Felicis Felix for you before, but the answer I got was that I had to brew it myself." "That's nothing." Ino waved his hand and smiled. "Perhaps Professor Snape thinks Harry needs Felicis Felix more than I do." He wasn't surprised by Snape's choice. Throughout the story, the two people who cared most about Harry were probably Snape and Sirius. But as fate would have it, these two people were the most incompatible. Ino didn't intend to interfere in Harry's affairs. The casual question he had just asked was the most he could ask. For the rest of the time, the atmosphere in the room of requirement was harmonious. As the saying goes, smart people are all equally smart, but stupid people are all stupid in their own ways. Undoubtedly, Ino and Hermione were both intelligent. Although some things were not made clear, the moment Ino accepted the Felicis Felix, a tacit understanding was already established. "Wait here for a moment." Ino glanced at the potion in the cauldron and vanished. A moment later, he reappeared, holding a magnificent item. The legendary item, the Ravenclaw item. Ino explained before Hermione could ask. "Oh my god. It actually exists. I thought it was just a legend." Hermione's eyes widened in disbelief. She hadn't expected the legend of this item to be true. "It's true. The legend is true." Ino handed the item to Hermione and said seriously, "But you can only wear it for a quarter of an hour a week, and I'll watch you wear it." The item's power was undeniable, but that was also his concern. Everything comes at a price, and that kind of extreme thinking can easily lead to dependence. "All right." Hermione took the diadem, examining it carefully. The gleaming sapphire in the center reflected a different hue in the candlelight. "Can I wear it now?" "Of course." Ino nodded slightly. But he soon noticed something different. Hermione, after donning the tiara, seemed like a completely different person. While her appearance remained the same, her entire demeanor suddenly took on a noble and cool air. It was a magical sight, as if Lady Rowena Ravenclaw's tiara was naturally suited for a woman. "This feels really good." Hermione, wearing the tiara, held out her hand and gazed at her palm. After a moment, she slowly lowered her hand, her gaze fixed on the cauldron before her. Though she made no other movements, Ino was aware of her state. It was clear that Hermione was lost in inner thought. But what truly surprised him was how Hermione and the tiara seemed so perfectly coordinated, as if they were custom-made for each other. It reminded him, similarly, of the sorting in the original story, where Hermione was torn between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. It seemed that, after an initial twist, some people and some things gradually lost their destiny. 15 minutes passed in a flash. After receiving the crown, Hermione looked exhausted. Not only did she look weary, but more importantly, she seemed a little listless, as if she could collapse at any moment. Seeing this, Ino immediately stepped forward and placed a hand on Hermione's shoulder. "A quarter of an hour seems a bit much for you." "It's okay." Feeling the support of her shoulder, Hermione slowly closed her eyes. After a long pause, Hermione opened her eyes again. I thought I heard the voice of Ms. Ravenclaw just now." "A whole day, 8K. Ziote tried his best." Finally, please vote, please vote. Chapter 325 Hermione's Thoughts. The Room of Requirement. The spacious room looked somewhat mysterious under the candlelight. But what was even more mysterious was Hermione's words at the moment. "Are you sure? Did you hear the voice of Ms. Ravenclaw?" Ino's face was a little solemn. To be honest, this information was beyond his expectations. Logically, any unknown attachment to the crown should have dissipated after it was brought into the asylum. Voldemort's residual soul was a good example. However, Hermione's next words dispelled his doubts. "Although I'm not sure if it was Ms. Ravenclaw, I did hear a voice, and she only said one sentence." Hermione sat on the floor, a brief look of reminiscence in her eyes, and then she said in a weak tone, "Extraordinary wisdom is the greatest wealth." That's it. After hearing Hermione's retelling, Ino suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. For a moment, he almost thought a black swan event had occurred. He even imagined plot points from novels, like the Ravenclaw heritage, a millennium-long conspiracy, and so on. But now it seemed more like a simple hint, like a Muggle game console, turned on correctly and hearing the power on chime. But after relaxing, he turned his gaze back to the girl beside him. "Hermione, You said a quarter of an hour was a bit stressful. From now on, if you want to think while wearing the crown, it's best not to exceed 10 minutes. After careful consideration, Ino shortened the time. Yes. Hermione nodded gently, as if accepting the suggestion. Seeing that Hermione didn't object, or even argue, he felt a little strange, as if something was missing. However, Hermione's mind wasn't on the crown at all. The moment her shoulders were supported, she was debating whether to just fall back, as the girls in the dorm had said, to seize the opportunity with precision. If she did fall, how could she act naturally without being caught wanting to be held? At this thought, Hermione suddenly fell into a state of hesitation and entanglement. As for what Ino had just said, she no longer cared. But Ino also noticed something strange. Hermione seemed to be under a spell. Her eyes were a little blurry, her breathing seemed to be very short, and in the candlelight, her whole body seemed to be in a trance. Hermione? How about I have a crib take you back? These potions are safe here anyway. No one is stupid, and Hermione's state is actually quite easy to guess. But looking around, the simmering cauldrons, the slowly rising white smoke, and the scattered books, made him feel like he was in a classroom. Potions? Oh, yes, potions. Hermione regained her composure slightly after hearing the word potion. I need to write this down now. I just had a new idea. Bat spleen can actually be replaced with lionfish spine powder, as well as sapweed and peppermint. As Hermione spoke, she pulled a thick notebook from her bag and began jotting down her thoughts without a word. Time flies. Even ordinary days often unfold different stories, some wonderful, some tragic. Late November, the penultimate weekend. On Friday, after finishing his last charms class, Harry walked out of the classroom exhausted. Despite the last time Ginny, Ron, Hermione, and the others stood up, and Cedric intervened, he did feel a sense of relief. After all, there were fewer pointing fingers, fewer rumors, and everything seemed to be moving in a positive direction. However, it seems that hardship always picks on the weak. After the mental torture subsided, physical exercise followed. Honestly, in the past, Harry looked forward to the end of classes the most. But now, not only weekends, but even the end of the last class, each day had become the time he least wanted to face. Because it meant he had to go outside the castle to practice magic with Mad Eye Moody again. The thought of Moody's scarred face and that madly spinning magical eye always made him feel vaguely uneasy. Harry couldn't help but sigh as he walked along the path outside the castle. He knew Moody was helping him. While his methods were a bit extreme, the results were significant. During this time, Harry had clearly felt his progress. If he dueled Malfoy again, he was confident he could dodge every spell he cast. After all, dodging was the skill Moody taught him most. As he walked, Moody's hut was within reach. It was another small, newly built round house not far from Hagrid's hut. Hurry. You don't have time to waste. Outside the house, Moody could see a hesitant figure from a distance. He felt a sense of frustration, but he had to urge him on. Meanwhile, Harry, upon hearing the urging, subconsciously changed his pace, becoming agile and erratic. Dodging is the first step to becoming an auror. No matter how powerful the magic, if it can't hit you, it's meaningless. Harry remembered what Moody had said when they first met. Outside the cabin. Seeing Harry's change in pace, Moody's scarred face finally showed a hint of relief. Come here. No dodging today. I'll teach you a few magic tricks. I think Hagrid should have told you about the first task. Hearing Hagrid's name, Harry turned slightly and looked towards the cabin next to him, but unfortunately, no one was there. Yes, Professor. Hagrid told me. The first task is a dragon fight. Excellent. Now that you know, it's easy. Moody nodded slightly, then continued to spin his magic eye frantically. Just as Harry was beginning to feel uneasy, Moody slowly spoke. When facing a dragon, simply dodging isn't enough. You also need to learn to hide and stall. Harry listened to Moody's explanation without commenting, but a certain disapproval lingered within him. He had gritted his teeth and persevered through the special training, driven by a desire to prove himself, not to get by. While the task entailed battling an enraged dragon as many times as possible within the allotted time, if he simply hid and ran the entire time, even if he managed to pass, what good would it do? Not to mention the others looking down on him, the scores from the 5 judges alone wouldn't likely be very high. Harry's expression naturally shifted, but the experienced retired auror didn't point it out. He saw the boy's reluctance as a positive sign, proving he still had enough energy for the rest of the training. Moody grinned at the thought, his scarred face growing even more sinister. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.